As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Tom, you know, you got it all wrong.
Oh, Anthony. He's a big boy. He knows what he said. What'd you say?
Now go home and get your fucking shine box.
Motherfucking mother!
Wake up, Henry.
When you love someone, you've got to trust them. There's no other way.
I'm going. I want my money right now.
Get your money. Go work.
The arrangement is over.
No kidding!
You said I'm bringing heat on you? I gotta listen to people because of your fucking shit?
Now I gotta turn my back.
They asked me again about you and the Jew's wife.
Welcome into the Original Gangsters podcast.
The hostess with the mostest.
If you go to, my Gangster Report website, plug, hit the siren, Benny.
We've been doing this show for about 3 years, and I would have to say our three most requested return guests, our three most popular episodes. I don't know where you are on that, Scott Bernstein, but you're first, second, or third. You're certainly in that top three. The episode we did covering the Mafia at large and Jimmy Hoffa, where the hell is this guy? Talking about the Detroit Mafia, is the first or second most popular episode we've ever done. I've had you back here with Jeff, also a great episode, but your solo act with me was arguably the most popular show we've ever done. This is the first time you've been back since just you. I'm thrilled to have you, Scott Bernstein. Welcome back to the Spiro Avenue.
Thanks for having me. I'm
show.
honored. I'm in the third time members club. Hopefully I can, get to double digits before it's all said and done on our careers.
That's like Tony Paul territory, yeah.
So people love this stuff. I've been able to make a career out of it. And what we're doing today is really kind of at the heart or the crux of why I got into this to a degree. And when I was working as a law student, working mob cases for the Illinois Attorney General's office as an intern, my only points of reference, because people assume that I was kind of always into this, and I wasn't. It wasn't something I got into until I was in my 20s. But my only points of reference for this world was Goodfellas and Casino. And when I was working in the AG's office, and this would have been 2001, 2, 3-ish, I felt like those movies were coming to life in the work that I was doing. And I was like, I want to know more about the real stories behind the stories that kind of sparked my interest in this.
Why do you think we care so much? Why do we like this so much?
Because, they live outside the parameters of normal society, and it's something that you can kind of be interested in and in some ways kind of live vicariously through without actually putting your toe into that water or jumping into the deep end of that pool or that ocean. What I've found in studying these guys and getting to know a lot of them is that you're doing yourself a disservice if you're looking at everyone as kind of a one-dimensional name on a piece of paper. And I was guilty of that for a long time. I mean, these are three-dimensional, multi-dimensional human beings. Some of them are very likable. Some of them are fun to be around. Some of them are psychopaths, and you wouldn't want to have a drink or a meal with them. But some of them, I see very easily how people can be seduced by the life.
I mean, people watch Goodfellas, for example, and we'll talk about it. I kind of want to hang out sometimes with that group. Yeah. So you think there's an element, we'll get to more of the details.
Well, this is my job. I mean, sometimes my job is literally to go out and socialize with these guys, field research. And it's a slippery slope. I mean, it really is. And I've gotten bit a couple times, not to the point where I ever got physically hurt or arrested or anything, but where I let lines blur and it came back to bite me. And it's something I always have to be aware of, that as much as you think these guys like you or as fun as they are to hang out with you, they're at the heart, these guys are predatory, and they kill you in the blink of an eye if it was going to benefit them or it was going to protect them.
So do you view them, obviously we know the distinction, Mafia from an average Joe like you or me, that's law-abiding. We understand that distinction. One breaks the law, one doesn't. But that aside, just as guys hanging out, is there a distinction there? Are these guys Machiavellian in this? They'll drop you if it benefits them even 1%, in a second? Like, how are they fundamentally different aside from the literal behavior?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most visceral ways is that, and this is a great line from the movie Goodfellas, in the Mafia, when you're murdered, it's your best friend that's pulling the trigger. And you're being killed by the people that are closest to you. It's not people with masks and, drive-bys or it's very up close and personal.
Your killers come with smiles.
Right.
That's what he says.
Yeah, and it couldn't be more true.
So, you're hanging out with these guys. You view them because they're not going to whack you. You're still here, at least.
Well, but you have to be careful, and I make sure that you're in, for the most part, in public places.
You felt that way too.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and a couple times I have gone to private residences, and you have to be, you have to be on your toes.
Do you tell someone, "Hey, I'm going to this address"? You tell them in advance.
Yeah. First time I ever went to go meet a mobster, I called an FBI contact and was just like, and this was somebody that was possibly involved in the Jimmy Hoffa disappearance, and I called a guy that I know and just, hey, just so you know, this is who I'm going to meet. This is where I'm going to meet him.
Why were you summoned there?
I had just put out a documentary called Detroit Mob Confidential. Go check it out. You can get it on Amazon Prime. And I featured a kind of a part of the film as well as a part of my book on this one person. And we had some mutual acquaintances, and he wanted to, pick my brain. He ended up becoming a valuable source to me, and someone that I felt very close to in this realm. Still, I felt like this guy would kill me if he needed to, but in the context of a mob reporter and his sources, he was someone that was very good to me. And his name was Frank the Bomb Marito, longtime soldier in the Detroit Mafia, was an acting capo for Billy Giacalone, who was probably the guy that did kill Jimmy Hoffa. And then Frank the Bomb was Billy Jack's right-hand man.
No, he wasn't summoning you for a reprimand. It was just to pick your brain.
He just wanted to meet me and see what I was about, and I went to he hosted when he's been dead now for 5-6 years, R.I.P. The Bomb, but and his territory was South Warren, so you can imagine it's a rogues gallery of it's a hodgepodge of lower class white, lower class black, bikers, not lower class, lower income. I don't mean to say lower.
No, I'm with you.
And tattooed teenagers. He used to host a spaghetti dinner every Tuesday at a place on the east side called East Side Manor. And it was a place for his crew to come and kind of celebrate the week and break bread together. And he invited me to it, and there was a number of people there that were giving me the evil eye.
Oh,
and
really?
Didn't like that.
You felt it?
Yeah, well, they were like giving, and at one point he snapped at one of his guys and was like, he's here with me. I told him he could come here. And if you have a problem with it, you bring it up to me.
So there's that line in Casino. It's probably my favorite scene in that movie right before. And it's Robert De Niro narrating and says something to the effect of, normally, I'd give my chance at a meeting with Nicky. 99 out of 100, I come out of that alive.
Right.
He gave himself 50-50. What did you give yourself when you got that phone call? Were you 99?
No, I was 99. I didn't. I would.
You called the
I wouldn't
FBI.
have gone. Right. I was being careful.
1%.
Right. I was being careful, but I didn't. I wouldn't have gone if I didn't feel like I had assurances from the people that were setting it up that this wasn't going to be some kind of ambush. Now, I have been summoned to a meeting.
If the Mafia says they're not going to kill you,
no,
take that to the bank, right? I'm sure Hoffa had promises.
Right. Well, you have to be able to sift through, cut through a lot of fat in this world and know what's true and what's not, and who to believe and who not to believe. And like I said, Frank ended up being a tremendous asset to me. And it's human nature, though. I mean, he was on the outs with a lot of guys after Billy Giacalone had died, and there was a benefit for him. Bringing me close to him pissed off a lot of guys that he was mad at.
Have you ever been more scared than that?
Yeah, I was threatened. I was summoned to a meeting with another criminal. I don't want to go into who it was, but
is he alive? He's
alive, and he's someone that I take precautions for. He was angry about something that I wrote and felt like I was exposing him to law enforcement scrutiny and talking about an old murder that he had been charged in, and the charges were dropped before trial. And there's no way that anybody's ever going to come back and try to charge him again for it. But there's no statute of limitations on a murder. And he was quite animated and throwing not so veiled threats in my direction.
So he threatened you?
Yeah.
Did you call anybody to call the FBI then?
Well, at that point also I was there with some of his family members who stuck up for me. So they were protecting me.
So the whole Pacino never speak out against the family thing, that doesn't really...
Right. And then after...
They didn't die for that?
Right. Well, then his cousin and him started arguing with his cousin being like, don't ever disrespect Scott.
So, but we got to the 1%, I might die.
I didn't think I was going to die, but I definitely felt like...
1%.
I definitely felt like I had to remove myself
okay.
from the restaurant that I was at.
So we're obviously tonight talking about two of the ultimate classics, the Scorsese entries into this library of fantastic mob movies. Maybe we'll have you back to discuss some of the other ones out there. There's so many good ones. Obviously, Goodfellas and Casino, I think, are two of the top five on anybody's list.
And I've done a lot of professional work on these two stories. Just quick self-promotion. I wrote a book about the events surrounding the movie Casino. It's called Family Affair. It's been out for over a decade.
Halfway through it, it's fantastic.
Go read it. There hasn't been a lot of people to read it, but I think you'll enjoy it. I'm very proud of it, even though it didn't do incredibly well. I think people got confused because there had been a book on the same subject, even though they were totally different stories. But it was the title was similar to mine. It had come out a couple months before mine. I think a lot of people got confused between the two titles and thought that mine was like a softcover version of that hardcover book. But that's neither.
Yeah, you wrote the Cliff Notes.
Right.
Yeah, right.
And I have produced and appeared on two very high production value documentaries on Fox News related to both the true story behind Casino and the true story behind Goodfellas. You can get them on Fox Nation, which is the Fox News streaming platform. And the Goodfellas one came out in 2022, and the Casino one just dropped in the summer, in June.
So you've talked with many, many mobsters about many, many topics, a myriad of subjects over the years. That's your beat. You're a literal expert in it. You've written books on it. You're also a huge fan and savant with these movies. I'm curious where this intersection is. Has anyone ever said to you, hey, Scott, that shit in Goodfellas, that was bullshit. That's not how things are like. We don't do things that way. Or is there been any type of pushback or the opposite? Are they rubber stamping it saying, hey, Scott, you want a real depiction of how we do things here? Go watch Casino. I mean, what is the mafia, the actual mafia's perception of these movies? Do they enjoy them? Do they feel they're true?
They love them.
They love them.
They feel like it validates them and further pushes the narrative that they're kind of icons in their own way. It promotes them. I mean, The Godfather was the greatest thing that ever happened to the Mafia. It was the greatest recruiting tool in the history of organized crime. And it also coincided at that same time in the 70s with the quote-unquote opening of the books. The ability to get inducted into the New York Mafia had been kind of, the spigot had been turned off because of the Appalachian Conference, 1957. They referenced it in Goodfellas, where all the mafia bosses from around the country came to a mob summit in upstate New York in 1957, and it got raided by local police, and then it became quite a headline grabber. And as a method to kind of like batten the hatches and prevent, I guess, further damage to the organization, they stopped inducting new members for about 15 or so years. And then right after The Godfather, the books opened up again in 1975-ish.
And those are not unrelated events, you're saying?
I'm saying that once The Godfather came out, it became, not only did the gangsters themselves love it, the younger guys wanted to aspire to that. Not to say that that hadn't been the case before that, but this was such a cultural touchstone and such a turning point culturally that I don't want to say they were connected, but they definitely, the release of The Godfather and the Godfather phenomena, if you will, helped boost the ranks of the Mafia in the mid-'70s when they opened the books up and they brought in hundreds of people. And I would guess most of those people loved The Godfather.
So they like it, in short.
Yeah. And Goodfellas and Casino. I mean, the one thing I hear from people that knew the Goodfellas crew, quote unquote, which was a branch of the Lucchese crime family out of Brooklyn. In the movie, they're the Cicero crew, but in real life, they were the Vario crew. A lot of them mentioned that, Henry Hill, hit the jackpot. That Ray Liotta did such an amazing job of sanitizing Henry Hill and making him palatable. And that he was able to really live off that for the rest of his life. I mean, he got paid for appearances and became this kind of celebrity off of this depiction of him that wasn't necessarily, I think the facts were accurate, but the personality was a little bit
of artistic license there. Yeah.
Ray Liotta's character, Henry, was considerably, from what I've heard, considerably more likable than Henry Hill.
Well, we'll get into the deep end there in a second. But
because by the way, that's why Goodfellas works, in my opinion.
It has to be.
Because he's the only likable character, even though he's still unredeemable. He's the only character that you kind of feel like has some level of moral compass, even if it's not at the level of a normal person. It's different than Jimmy and Tommy. And
when they murder Billy Batts, he's got that look on his face like, what are we doing here? Yeah. No, that's fair. That's a fair assessment. Although I like some of the other characters.
No, I'm not saying they're not. I like
Scorsese's mom was very
I
nice.
love them. I'm not saying they're not. I'm just saying in terms of like someone to root for.
Yeah.
I guess you could root for Tommy and Jimmy too, like the way you root for the bad guys.
Yeah,
but,
Jimmy's like one of those guys who root for the bad guys in the movies.
But I'm just saying, I think the connection that the audience felt with Henry, the character, the Ray Liotta character, and at that time, Ray Liotta was a no-name. I know they wanted to cast Tom Cruise in it, and there were a lot of like people that were worried.
Wouldn't have worked. Tom Cruise?
Right, but Scorsese stuck to his guns, and it was the perfect choice, and he was and as great as that, the movie doesn't work without Ray Liotta's performance.
So, do you feel, and we're going to get into the character breakdown next, I want to hit one more point, though, as far as the setup of this. It's interesting that this has been used as a recruiting tool unintentionally, probably. I don't think this is what Coppola and Scorsese had in mind necessarily. But don't we culturally sort of ignore the fact that in virtually all these movies, it doesn't end well?
Yeah.
These guys are drug addicted, dead. Michael Corleone's dying alone in his chair.
This is an Italian mafia, but this is related to the big-time drug kingpin world. One of the best quotes I ever took from White Boy Rick, when I was chronicling his story. Another shameless self-promotion. Go to Netflix and check out White Boy documentary. I also worked on the Matthew McConaughey movie that I'm not as proud of, but you can watch that too if you want.
Ringing endorsement. This is my worst work. Go check it out.
I wish I could sit here 5 years later and co-sign a $40 million movie that I worked on and say it's the greatest thing in the world. But it's like, be careful what you wish for. It was a nightmare experience. And as a result, the movie was horrible.
But check it out. It's on Netflix.
I digress. No. What? No. White Boy, the I want to be very clear.
Yeah.
White Boy, the documentary is on Netflix, and it's great.
Okay.
It's the greatest thing I've ever done. It went viral on Netflix. It was number 4 overall on the entire platform for 72 hours.
It was ahead of Black Mirror for a day.
Yeah, I mean, it was huge.
Yeah.
So I'm not talking about the documentary on Netflix. The film, White Boy Rick, which I'm not sure if it's on Netflix or not, you can get it on, I'm sure, a number of streaming platforms. That's the one that I'm shitting on.
Fair.
Just to be clear.
Yeah.
The Netflix thing I'm incredibly proud of.
So you feel that there is a little bit of a neglect there with the downfall aspect? Because
So let me just, I'm sorry, I lost my point. But my point was, White Boy Rick said to me, every drug kingpin that he was around, and he was around all of the major ones in Detroit and some down in Miami, they were all obsessed with Scarface. And he said to me, obviously none of these guys waited to the end of the movie because none of them learned from the fact that it didn't end well for Tony Montana. So, and as a result, a lot of the guys that he was talking about, that he was surrounded with when he was 17, 18 years old, these big, high-profile drug kingpins in Detroit that were at that point in their mid to late 20s, a majority of them died violently.
These are not usual happy endings.
Right.
I mean, it's just the reality. And it's funny because even I romanticize aspects of this, although I've never dabbled in the Mafia. And they haven't invited me, let's face it. If I had been invited, maybe I would go. It's like Thy Shadows, the Mafia, I'm not invited to any of these things.
I mean, with Goodfellas, the main character, he survives. Casino,
just died a few years ago.
The main character dies the way he lived.
Yeah. And let's get into that. We'll start with Goodfellas because we're going in the chronology.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit before about how we're going to handle this. Do we get into the depths of the story? Do we start with the characters and then get into the story? You and I both thought it'd be better to kind of go character by character and work our way through and then wrap our arms around the story. Mm-hmm. You're obviously the expert and going to do most of the talking here, but I'll set this up. So I wanted to start, I think Henry Hill would have made more sense to some people. I started with who I find the most compelling character in Goodfellas, James Burke. So we have the real versus real. James Burke, Jimmy the Gent, that's the real guy, versus the portrayal Robert De Niro is Jimmy Conway in Goodfellas. Probably the best acting performance for my money in that film. He's outstanding. Talk to me, James Burke versus Jimmy Conway, real versus real. How close was that portrayal?
I mean, identical. And what you saw from De Niro in Goodfellas playing Jimmy the Gent was exactly the way Jimmy the Gent was. And anybody that knows Jimmy the Gent will tell you that. De Niro nailed it. That's and Jimmy Burke, he's up there with Meyer Lansky in terms of the most powerful and respected non-Italian members of organized crime. I mean, Lansky's in a level kind of all by himself, but other than actual mafia dons, Jimmy Burke had just as much juice as any made guy, any capo in the Italian mafia. Which is just so I just want to point out to people that maybe don't understand the inside baseball of this. That's very rare that an Irish soldier or he had his own crew. I mean, he was the equivalent of a capo or a captain. I mean, he ran his own, the Roberts Lounge crew, which is the guys that pulled off the Lufthansa heist, yada, yada, yada. So, he was given a whole faction of that crime family to oversee. And that, like I said, very rarely happens with non-Italians.
What did they see in him that they gave that to him?
Intelligent and ruthless. And that's a vicious combination in that world. When you're someone who can be an earner and a killer, normally mafia families are split up amongst one half of the family are earners and one half of the family are killers. In fact, some mafia families have it where, the Christmas bonus that's supposed to come every December, if you're an earner, you got to pay that Christmas bonus. If you're a killer, you don't.
So there's, they're talking about the Lufthansa heist in Goodfellas. Yeah. And, there's a line where Ray Liotta's Henry Hill says, he didn't want to share the take with them. He'd rather whack them. And then you see the guy in the freezer truck. And
Which really happened.
Did that really happen?
Yeah,
how accurate was that portrayal?
Well, they conflate some things. So the character that gets put into the meat locker in the movie is the Frank Carbone character. And Frankie Carbone wasn't a real person. He was a composite. But most people think the majority of that character was based on Angelo Seppi. And Angelo Seppi was murdered, but he was not found hanging on a meat hook. Another mob associate named Richie Eaton was the guy that was found hanging on the meat hook. And that was related to the aftermath of Lufthansa when some of the monies were being hidden and washed. They were going to different parts of the country. And in this case, Jimmy Burke sent a bunch of money down to Florida to launder through a restaurant and nightclub, and also through some cocaine deals. And he was using Tommy in the movie. It was Tommy DeVito. In real life, it was Tommy DeSimone. And he was using Two Gun Tommy DeSimone as kind of his point man with this Richie Eaton, another guy named Monteleone, and a woman named, I think, Teresa Ferrara. And they got cute with the money. And they all got killed. Tommy got killed for a number of reasons.
And we'll get to him.
Yeah.
Was De Niro's portrayal as this ruthless, I'll kill you just so I get a bigger share of the money, was that accurate? Like, just as the heart of him?
This will be a point of reference for people that know the movie. If Stax Edwards doesn't screw up and not get rid of the getaway car like he was supposed to, which is, they show this in the movie. That's exactly what happened.
That actually happened.
That he, instead of going to get rid of the delivery car, he was supposed to deliver the getaway car to John Gotti. The Gotti.
So Stax Edwards is a real character?
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
His name was Parnell Stax Edwards. He was actually much more of a mob guy than you see in the movie. In the movie, they make it seem like, he was just, a guitar player that used to hang around Robert's Lounge. But in reality, he went way back with Tommy. Him and Tommy were like childhood friends.
But he was actually a black guy, right?
A black guy. He was
Isn't that rare in the Mafia?
Yes, very rare.
Okay. What would Tommy got him into the back door?
Tommy, vouched for him, and he was more than just like a local musician hanging around the club. He was working scams and doing collections, and
just seems like the most. I mean, in the movies, they're portrayed as very racist. A Jew broad prejudice against Italians.
That's the best. That's my favorite thing. In this day and age, a Jew broad prejudiced against Italians.
They're always coming off as there's always N words in the Bronx Tale.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So this is like pretty rare.
Yes.
I assume that was artistic license.
So Edwards is in charge. Stax Edwards is supposed to get rid of the getaway car. Instead, he goes to his girlfriend's house, just like you see in the movie, gets stoned, parks the getaway van in front of a fire hydrant, gets it ticketed and I think towed. They matched fingerprints, and within like 3 or 4 days after the heist, everybody's looking at the Robert Lounge crew. I mean, they were already going to be looking at the Robert's Lounge crew because for anything that big that happened at the airport, they're immediately going to think Jimmy the Gent and his guys. But now they have like physical proof that one of the members of their crew has fingerprints connected to a car that he was assigned to get rid of. So my point is, if that never happened, I don't know how, fate would have unspooled. The fact that Stax Edwards fucked up so bad to start kind of the second chapter of all of this put Jimmy the Gent in a position where then he feels like, now I got to kill everybody.
So you think Stax Edwards was the first domino in the I got to sever all ties?
And the keeping all the money is like a bonus. Or not a bonus. It's like a part and parcel, I guess.
Did he need approval to kill those people within his own crew?
No, because none of those guys, other than Tommy, when Tommy wasn't even made, but Tommy had the protection of kind of a made guy. So Tommy was the only one he had to get permission to kill.
Did Tommy actually kill Stacks like in the movie?
Yes. Tommy and Angelo Seppi, who was kind of like Frank Carbone. And in the movie, Frank Carbone and Tommy kill him, but in reality, it was Angelo Seppi and Tommy. And it was, I think it's important to point out, in the movie, Tommy couldn't care less that he killed Stacks. In real life, it ate Tommy up.
That was his friend.
Yeah. He felt really bad about it. I mean, he was going to do it because it needed to be done, but it wasn't something that he took pleasure in or was joking. You know, in the movie, he's joking with Carbone. Yeah, take that,
Did
make
Carbone
it to go.
actually walk with
make
the
it to go.
Yeah, take that coffee to go. What are you doing? Better chance of letting him drive. Right. Tommy is so great in that one, honestly. Let's pivot a little bit to Henry Hill. And Henry Hill was sort of the logical place to start, but I'm a Jimmy the Gent guy. Henry Hill, one of the only guys in here that their name just came right over. Mm-hmm. Henry Hill is playing Henry Hill, obviously Ray Liotta. You talked about the portrayal and how that helped, I don't know, sanitize, boost his resume, clout, whatever. The real Henry Hill, how far of a departure was Ray Liotta's portrayal from the real Henry Hill?
Like I said, factually, it was 100% true. He just wasn't anywhere nearly as likable or slick as Ray Liotta.
So they get the basic facts right.
Yeah, he was.
But what
grew up in that neighborhood?
Unlikable. I mean,
nobody liked him.
Nobody liked him.
He wasn't a very likable.
Then
person.
why was he able to penetrate as a non-Italian? He was only half,
because he got in really early. I mean, just like you see in the movie, he's 11, 12 years old, and he's working at the Vario Cruz pizza shop and taxi cab stand, and started running errands for Paulie Vario. At the time, Paulie Vario was, I'm not even sure if he was a captain at it. I'm pretty sure he was. But he as Henry got older, Paulie's position in the family ascended. By the 70s and early 80s when Henry flips, Paulie's top 3 or 4 or 5 guys in that whole family, not just a captain that ran Brooklyn.
Does Paulie, like the real
so
Paulie,
my point
like
is,
him? I mean,
right, so that's my point.
He's the one.
That's my point. Paulie Vario took a liking to him because he knew him from the time he was 11 or 12 years old. And that's who protected him.
A little Bronx tale,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And same with Tommy. And well, I'll wait till you ask me about Tommy. But the physical appearance of Tommy was totally opposite of what you see in the movie. But outside of the physical appearance, they hit a home run with that portrayal.
So they didn't like him. Was there a specific aspect of him? Was he a Weasley guy?
Yes. Henry Hill, yes.
Did they not trust him?
No, they did not trust him.
And he eventually did flip on him, but did he really take the bullet for him early when he was a kid, like in the movie? Never rat on your friends. Never rat on your friends.
I can't remember. I'm guessing that was true. I haven't read Wise Guy, the book that it's based on, in a while. I don't remember for sure if there was an actual arrest he took when he was 14 years old or whatnot.
Yeah,
but he got in, and this is another thing that is it's true in organized crime circles. It's a universal truth. You could be the most unlikable guy in the world, but if you have one person that's important backing you or supporting you, nobody can do anything about it. So, I mean, again, it's something that happens quite a bit. So with Henry Hill, he got in good with Paul Vario and Paul Vario's brothers. You meet Tuddy in the movie, and there was a real Tuddy, but then there was another like 4 or 5 brothers. And then he had sons too. You see in the scene where this is Peter and then Paul and Marie. He did have Paulie had 2 sons, Peter and Paul, that were also very close with Henry because they were closer to Henry's age. I know one of them was called, I think Peter, they called him Rugsy. And Jimmy the Gent liked him. So Jimmy the Gent and Paulie Vario had a soft spot for Henry Hill, and that was kind of his ticket to kind of act a fool.
Was Henry Hill as closely looped in as he's portrayed in the movie?
Yeah.
So that's a legitimate...
Right, because...
He had juice.
Right, because of Paulie and Jimmy.
Did Jimmy like him?
Yeah. Jimmy and Paulie liked him.
So Jimmy and Paulie liked him.
But again, similar backstories. They kind of mentored him, like you see in the movie, from a young age. They met him when he was 12, 13, 14 years old.
Did Paulie like Tommy?
Paulie liked Tommy until the end.
Until the end. So we'll get to him. Let's do Karen first. Yeah. And Karen, the Lorraine Bracco portrayal, I don't know if she gets enough credit. I don't know what your perception.
Oh, she was amazing.
She was. I mean, that is a 10 out of 10. That's one of the best.
And nobody knew who Lorraine Bracco was before that movie.
That was
either.
her breakout. Yeah. I mean, she's honestly my second favorite acting performance. Like just even ahead of Pesci. I think De Niro was the best. But the real Karen Hill. How close did Lorraine Bracco's portrayal capture the real Karen Hill?
I think the stuff you see at the end of the movie, where she's like actively involved in what's going on, was more of a snapshot of reality than, not to say she immediately, when they first met, was complicit, but she had a hustler vibe to her from an early point in time, where they kind of make it in the movie like she was
nice Jewish girl
that, you know, pretended not to know what her husband was doing and didn't want to know. And I don't know how long that, they make it seem like that lasted until when he comes home from prison and starts moving the coke, and she's helping him at the very the last half hour of the movie or 40 minutes. But from what I can gather, you know, her and Jimmy's wife and were more active, involved in things that were going on with that crew than just kind of like nice Italian housewives that were sitting there raising a family. Not to say they didn't do that, they did, but you know, Karen was almost like a partner in crime, as well as being a wife.
I mean, the FBI agent says near the end, the witness.
Don't give me the babe in the woods routine, Karen. I've seen you on those wiretape. You're talking about cocaine.
You can tell we like these movies. Don't give me that babe in the woods routine, which is one of the great quotes to use. Like,
and that's Ed, and that character is played by the real person, Ed McDonald, who was the guy that actually flipped them. Plays the role of the guy that flips them.
Oh, I never knew that. I love that little weird trivia. I knew the Tom Cruise thing, which is just.
And then they also, I'm guessing you've seen this. I don't know if your audience has. As Ed McDonald is flipping Henry and getting all of the information about Lufthansa, he, I don't even say accidentally, just blurts out about his involvement in point shaving with the Boston College Eagles basketball team, not even realizing that it was illegal. Ed McDonald, who had gone to Boston College and had played basketball at Boston College, was like, wait, what? What are you talking about? You were shaving points at Boston College? And that was how they ended up getting Jimmy. And that's, we can go, but they eventually got Jimmy for some murders that were tied to the fallout of Lufthansa. But initially, when they put Jimmy in prison, it had nothing to do with Lufthansa. It was for the point shaving with Boston College.
So, I mean, Karen is, presented as, nice Jewish girl. The dad hasn't digested a decent meal in 6 weeks.
He's not Jewish.
Yeah, he's not Jewish. Did you know what these people were like? Your father never stayed on hours of the night without calling.
There's so many quotable scenes in it.
We get these. We can just quote to each other. People will be like, "I know, we've heard it."
But the salacious piece of information that not a lot of people know is that she was Paulie's side piece.
Now, it says who? How sure are you on that?
Oh, it's like well known.
So Paulie was sleeping with Karen.
Paulie was sleeping with Karen. Yes. Did
Henry know?
He eventually knew. I don't know how long it took him to find out, but.
How did Paulie get away with that? With the whole, if there's one thing about these Italians, they don't like to sleep with other people's wives. That was a casino line,
right?
But how did he get away with that?
If you're powerful enough, you can do as I say, not as I do. So believe me, just like I'm talking about guys that nobody likes, but they're protected by other guys. How that's so kind of universal. The whole guy sleeping with other guys' wives, just like the notion, or how there's some type of ban on that, or the notion that there's some type of ban on narcotics trafficking, those are all myths. Like, in theory, yes. In practice, no. I mean, you see it in Casino, too. As you just quoted the movie Casino.
Well, yeah, but it was a problem in that, though, that happened.
Right.
So Paulie...
Because Tony, or the character Nicky Santoro, whose real life counterpart was Tony Spilotro, because Tony wasn't as powerful as Paul Vario.
So that's the distinction.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated when you say that Paulie had not just like a side piece, like a recurring...
It was like his girlfriend.
Ongoing...
Yeah. And then Tommy tried to get in on it, too, which is what actually led to Paulie allowing people to kill Tommy.
Really? Tell me about that.
So Tommy only lasted for 2 weeks, maybe, after Lufthansa. I mean, he was killed within the month. His murder had less to do with Lufthansa fallout, like all the others, and more to do with a series of circumstances that coalesced. A series of missteps by him, stepping out of line, that had been building up, where people had been wanting to kill Tommy for a long time. Most notably, John Gotti and the whole Queens Gambino crew. Because of what you saw in the movie, he killed Billy Batts.
So that really happened?
Really happened. Billy Batts was a made guy who was very close to John Gotti.
Did the shine box exchange happen?
I think there was something along those lines, not verbatim, but one of the big differences was that he wasn't killed that night. In the movie, they make it seem like it all happened.
What actually happened with the shine box going into
He shows up, Billy Batts is coming home from prison and having a welcome home party. He sees Tommy. He hadn't seen Tommy in 15 years. He's like kissing on Tommy like you see in the movie, where Tommy feels like, why are you touching me? Like, I'm not a 15-year-old anymore. Like, now I'm a big deal, and you can't just be pawing me and busting my balls in front of everybody, which is what he was doing. And I do believe he made some comment about him previously shining his shoes. And like you see in the movie, they kicked Tommy out of it was called the Suite, which was Henry Hill's restaurant headquarters. But unlike in the movie, he doesn't come back that night and they kill him. It was like 2 weeks later, and Jimmy the Gent agrees to lure Billy Batts back there when it's closed, and they kill him.
So Jimmy the Gent was fully, it wasn't, he's kicking him in the movie.
Yeah, no.
This was more calculated and less impulsive than portrayed.
And it was the second member of the Gotti crew that Tommy had allegedly killed without permission. Another guy was named Foxy. Gerothy, I think his last name was Ron Gerothy. They call him Foxy. And he had been killed before Billy Batts. And these were two guys that were close to John Gotti. And Tommy wasn't a made guy at this point. And Gotti kept on going to Vario, being like, I want to kill him. And Vario's like, you can't kill him. I don't care if he's not made. He's my guy. So then you have the Lufthansa heist, which Tommy took part in and was one of the stick-up guys. Then in the week after Lufthansa, like I was mentioning about Richie Eaton, who they found on the meat hook, Jimmy the Gent gives Tommy money to go down to Florida with, to launder, and to put into coke deals. Tommy is having a romantic relationship with this woman, Teresa Ferrara. She starts stealing along with these two other guys, Richie Eaton and this Monteleone guy. So that's another check in the box of things that are starting to build up against Tommy. Money comes up missing, even if it wasn't Tommy, it was people that Tommy was responsible for, including someone he was sleeping with. And then the ultimate disrespect, or what led to Paul Vario allowing the Gotti crew to kill Tommy, was that Tommy was with Karen, and I don't know if they were on vacation at a hotel or they were at one of their homes, but Tommy tried to sleep with Karen when Karen was still married to Henry and was Paul Vario's girlfriend, and she wouldn't go along with it, didn't want to sleep with him, and tried to fend him off, and he like physically assaulted her.
Whoa. And did she
And
report
she
that to Paulie?
and I don't know if she went to Henry first. It eventually makes its way back to Paulie. And at that time, Paulie is like, okay, now this kid has gotten completely out of control, and he just physically assaulted my girlfriend. I'm going to allow the John Gotti crew to kill him.
Wow. See, I had no idea about that.
And the rumor is that John Gotti actually pulled the trigger.
Do you think Paulie was more mad about you're assaulting Henry Hill's wife or you're assaulting my
my girlfriend? Yeah, it was an ego thing for Vario. Yeah,
Wonderful.
and I have no idea what I don't know, and I don't want to. I wouldn't speculate how that affected Henry and Tommy's relationship, because Henry and Tommy were very close.
Tell me about the assassination of Tommy, and I want to get into the character and Pesci's portrayal after this, but he's walking into the house. He's presumably going to be made. You mentioned there were a number of grievances that they had that led to his death, which Leota says it was revenge for Billy Bats and a lot of things. Yeah. And you talked about, I guess, some of those, a lot of things. Did that actually happen? How it was portrayed? I
don't know if there's it's like a blow by blow of what happened, but it is known that he told his mother, who he did live with, that he was going to a ceremony. The people around him, he had told them that he was going to get made. Paulie told him, "You're going to get made," and he ended up being ambushed by the Gotti crew instead of getting made. So I don't know if it was exactly like you saw in the movie where he walks into a empty room and realizes what's about to happen and says, "Oh no," and then they get him in the back of the head. I just know he showed up at a residence thinking he was going to get made, and John Gotti and a bunch of killers were there waiting for him.
Did they really shoot him in the face so he couldn't have an open casket
I don't know,
at the funeral?
I don't know about that part either.
Okay. Tell me about the maid ceremony. Is that a real thing in the Mafia?
Yes, it's very important.
What does an actual Mafia being made ceremony look like?
Right now, everybody would be literally everybody would be naked. People would be so paranoid about bugs that now the kind of common protocol is for making ceremonies that everybody strips down, and you do it in your underwear.
Really?
Yes.
Like literally?
Yeah, literally.
So there are a bunch of guys in their underwear?
Yes. This has been more the last 15, 20 years. But
how many maid ceremonies, underwear clad maid ceremonies?
Well, there was a pretty famous one that made it into a court document with a New York mafia boss named Vinnie Gorgeous. Vincent Bastiano, they all call him Vinnie Gorgeous. He's kind of like a carbon copy of John Gotti, but only made it about a year as a boss. And if he had made it 5-10 years, everybody would know who he was. But when he took over, he was rightfully concerned of people recording, and all of his making ceremonies. Everybody's stripping down.
Take me to the 70s then. What was it like?
So in the 70s, so they open the books up in 75, 76, and they start ushering in, hundreds of people into the 5 families. And at that point, they were probably happening once a month, once every couple months. And pick a location, usually either a private residence or the back of a restaurant, back of a barbershop, banquet halls, hotel rooms, hotel suites, and you are promoted, or I should say it's not promoted, proposed. You are proposed by a sponsor. The boss, the underboss, and the consigliere are normally there, sitting at the table, the front of the room. And there's a gun and a knife and a picture of a saint cards. And they usually take people down one by one. And your sponsor, they'll put the guys that are the new inductees into a room, let's say upstairs, or if it's in a restaurant, in another part of the restaurant. And then they'll bring them in one by one. Their sponsor will bring them in. And whoever's conducting the ceremony Sometimes the boss doesn't conduct it. He'll just talk, and then the underboss will actually, or the conciliary will actually cut your finger and light a saint card on fire, and you put it in your hands, and you recite, if I betray this family, let me burn like the saint card's burning in my hands right now. And normally, to start a meeting like that, before the inductees come, everybody goes around a circle and holds hands. And then they break the circle, do the making ceremony. And then let's say there's 5 new inductees. The 5 new inductees then link up with the rest of them. They all hold hands in a circle. They make some type of Sicilian prayer, and then they're officially a member of the family. They're given the set of rules. They're assigned to a crew and a captain. And then they usually go out and celebrate.
Is it a license to kill, like Leona says?
I mean,
license to do anything?
Yeah, I mean, that was more true in the 20th century. Now, and I've talked about it on my podcast, another shameless promotion, Original Gangsters podcast on YouTube and on Spotify, Apple, iTunes, wherever you can get it, audio. But the mafia doesn't really kill people anymore. I mean, you had a situation, or you had, kind of, if you want to compare numbers, let's just say the 1980s, 70s or 80s. I mean, you had just in New York City hundreds of mob-related killings, hundreds. In the 23 years since the turn of the century, there's been maybe 10, 15 mafia murders in the whole country.
Murder was illegal in both decades. Is it just advancements in
different
investigation?
Different ways of doing business. Not
a minor distinction.
Self-preservation.
But it was illegal then.
Right, but now they're.
Is it just
it's
better
always
forensics?
been. It's just better. It's just better ways of doing business. Now guys are like, if you don't pay your debt, you're not going to get killed. You're just going to get cut off, or you get booted out of town, or you're going to get a beating. But
so they'll knock you around a little bit.
Yeah, but the heat that comes from murders, I mean, you have to really, really press the envelope to get hit. And one of the last big. I'm going to tie this all back together. One of the last big New York mafia murders, and it happened within the same crime family we're talking about, the Lucchese crime family, was related partially to affairs of the heart. A guy was sleeping with a guy's wife or sleeping with a guy's girlfriend when he shouldn't have been, as well as not paying back some money. And it was a guy that he had once been friends with, very close friends with. And over the years, the one guy went from kind of the superior to the subordinate, had a hard time accepting that. And the former subordinate, who had become the superior, ordered the murder of, his former boss, who wasn't Italian.
Jimmy the Gent is portrayed as very upset, slamming the phone in the phone booth when he hears, there's nothing we could do about it.
About Tommy.
About Tommy's effectively assassination at his purported being made ceremony.
Right.
You said Jimmy the Gent was about as juiced up and respected as you could get. Was he actually upset at that assassination?
I don't know if he broke down crying the way they showed it.
He did not like it, though.
Yeah, but he was disturbed by it. Yes,
but obviously beneath Paulie.
But he couldn't do anything about it. Just like Henry Hill says it. We had to sit there and take it.
So that was an accurate portrayal. Then they really just had to.
As much as Jimmy the Gent had juice more than most mob guys, that's something he had no control over because Paulie trumped Jimmy.
Do you think he went up to Paulie one time and said, "Come on, bro"? I mean, where's the line with the disrespect there?
For all I know, I don't know. I don't know the granulars, but it's possible that Jimmy did go to Paulie before the murder and try to campaign for Tommy not being killed.
Do you think?
But it wouldn't. Obviously,
he probably didn't see it coming. In the movie, he didn't see it coming.
Right. I'm saying in the movie, the Jimmy the Gent character doesn't know that it's going to happen.
Do you think?
I'm saying in reality, he could have, and he could have gone to Paulie and tried to convince him otherwise, and it just didn't happen.
Do you think that was a shockwave for that family in the real life version of this when he was assassinated?
No, because Tommy wasn't really that big of a deal in the realm of the New York Mafia.
Now, he died at what, 28?
I'm not sure how old
he was. In his late 20s. I mean, he's older in the movie.
Okay,
and
in real life, he was.
I'll look it up.
He was big. I mean, he wasn't tiny. He was like a strapping 6'3".
Well, let's go to him. Yeah, Ben, can you throw up I know we're skipping Paul. We'll get back to Paul. Throw up Thomas DeSimone,
a.k.a. Two Gun Tommy.
Yeah, there's Two Gun Tommy. He kind of looks like a 70s bodybuilder version of Pesci. I don't know. I'm not saying.
No, I'm saying Joe Pesci's like 5'3".
No, yeah, that was an extreme.
Tommy DeSimone was like 6'3" and was like
he's a big burly guy.
Brawny.
So he died at 28. I was correct. That's pretty young.
Yeah, and he had a mafia pedigree. His uncle or his cousin had been the mafia boss of Los Angeles, Frank DeSimone.
Is 28 young to be made? In my head, you're like 45.
Yes, getting made in your 20s. Again, right after the books got opened, you did have some younger guys getting made because they were making everybody at that point. I would say, in this day and age or the last 30, 40 years, getting made in your 20s is probably the exception to the rule.
So you once they opened the books, you said the numbers went way up. How up are we talking? 40% of the people are made running around? 20%? 80%? What are we talking about here? How high of a distinction is it? Because when I found out he was 28, I'm like, man, that didn't raise alarm bells. They were making you at 28. I would have thought for sure I was walking into my ambush. But I don't.
Well, not if you're. No, well, not if you were Tommy D and you were or Two Gun Tommy, who
you said he wasn't that juiced up though.
You got to understand how big these are. These are like Fortune 500 companies. I mean, these are big organizations where the guys in Brooklyn don't necessarily know what the guys in Queens are doing, and the guys in Queens don't necessarily know what the guys in Manhattan are doing. You could be part of an organization and literally not know a lot of members of that organization. So I'm saying is like the only reason people talk about Two Gun Tommy DeSimone being murdered now is because he was a character in Goodfellas. It would not have raised, it would not have moved the needle at all in the world of day-to-day mafia functioning in New York in 1979 when he was killed, or 1978 when he was killed.
You said De Niro nailed Jimmy the Gent. Ray Liotta, the facts were right, but the spirit of it wasn't. Where does Joe Pesci's portrayal land?
You just like, it's no pun intended, but like those acting performances were just like a murderer's row. Like, 1927 Yankees. And everybody came up there and hit a grand slam. I mean, Joe Pesci's performance was iconic. It was iconic for a reason. The famous, How Am I Funny scene. It's a great story of how that scene came to be because that was not written in the screenplay.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Joe Pesci was, as a young man, connected to mob guys. Wasn't a mobster himself, but was a musician who was tied into the Four Seasons and all that stuff that was going on with Frankie Valli. And he had witnessed a similar situation at a bar when he was a younger guy with a guy that kind of looked after him, a mob guy that kind of looked after him who had a hair trigger temper and a personality that people could never gauge whether or not he was serious or psychotic. And this guy kind of knew it and played on it a little bit. And there was a actual back and forth at a nightclub that he witnessed that he told Scorsese about, and they kind of wrote that scene on the fly, and a lot of it was Pesci ad-libbing what he had witnessed 20 years before that.
I heard like Liotta and some of the other actors, if not all of them, like didn't even know he was going to do that.
Right.
Is that your understanding too?
Yeah.
That's just wild. It makes that scene even better.
Yeah.
There's a point, and there's an entire YouTube video on this, and I'm not intentionally omitting the guy's name. I'll credit him in a post edit. But he has this whole theory about this one line that Pesci drops on him where he says, he looks to Liotta in that scene and says, Henry Hill, it says, "You're supposed to be doing this stuff too, you know." And this guy's whole theory was that they were intentionally supposed to be making a scene, and that, you know, and breaking bottles and threatening.
I think he was just saying, you're supposed to be acting like a gangster too.
So you don't buy this guy's theory that that Liotta was supposed to be, or Henry Hill was supposed to be making a scene to, I can't remember his exact theory. He was trying to set up the bar owner or something. He had some.
See, I don't know if in the movie it's came out like there was a beef between the owner of the Bamboo Lounge and Tommy. I don't know if that's true, but there was a real gangster named, I don't know what his real name was, but his name was Sonny. They called him Sonny Bamboo, and he owned the Bamboo Lounge. And the Bamboo Lounge was torched, just like you see in the film. In the movie, I think the character was named Sonny Buns, and that actor ended up going to play in The Sopranos. He played Larry Boy Barisi in The Sopranos. His name is Tony Darrow, the actor. But there was a real Bamboo Lounge and a real owner named Sonny. Now, I don't know, again, if Sonny and Tommy had some beef where Tommy broke a glass over his head. Was the Pesci portrayal, we know the acting performance was great. Yeah. Was it true to the real person? He was loony. And when not to segue too quickly, but when I watched, before I knew the real stories, when I watched Casino for the first time, I walked out of it saying, Pesci just played his Tommy character in Vegas with a Chicago accent. But then he both of those characters were, you know, completely maniacal and unhinged. And he played both of them perfectly. But the possible perception that the Nicky Santoro character was a ripoff of the Tommy D character is not true, even though it might look like that could have been the case.
And that's a common observation. Oh, he's just replaying Tommy.
Yeah.
I've heard that repeatedly.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not unfair if you don't know what you just said, if you don't know the background of it. If they're both nuts, they're both nuts. What are you going to do? You know?
I guess the difference is, if we're talking about physical appearances, Tony Spilotro and Joe Pesci dressed up as Nicky Santoro were almost identical. And Tony Spilotro was a tiny 5'3", 5'4".
The nickname was the Ant.
Right.
Yeah. So you give Pesci an A+ as the you're throwing Casino up there. Yeah, that's it. We're gonna do the deeper dive on Casino later, but it's good to get it up there. And he actually really looks like him there. He actually looks like Tony the Ant. So you're a fan of the Pesci portrayal. I want to finish in terms of the character breakdown with Goodfellas with Paulie. We've talked about him. He's come up a lot. Paulie is portrayed in Goodfellas as stoic, thoughtful, calculating, measured, empathetic, you know, hands him the wad of crumpled up money and, you know, I'm going to turn my back on you. Was that the real Paul Vario?
I think it was like 80%. 80%.
Okay.
From people I've spoken to that knew Paul Vario said that he could fly off the handle more than you saw Paul Sorvino. Like you said, he played it more stoic. You never really hear him raise his voice. You see him get mad at Henry. In that was another great scene where he takes him after he gets out of prison and takes him in the backyard and says, you know, stay away from the garbage. You know, I'm not going to die in prison like Gribbs.
Yeah.
Gribbs got 75 years for just talking to some jerk off that was going around selling junk pies. And that's true. Mr. Gribbs, whose name's Carmine Tremonti, was, you know, Paul Vario took Gribbs' spot. And Gribbs died in prison because one of his soldiers was selling heroin. And whether Gribbs knew about it or not, I don't know. But that interaction I mean, I loved hearing that when I learned that. I was like, oh, Gribbs, that's a real person. Like, I thought that was just saying, I just threw a name out there.
So did Henry Hill really testify against Paul Vario?
Yeah.
And that did, he landed in prison.
Yeah, he died in prison. Jimmy Burke and Paul Vario both died in prison because of Henry Hill.
I know he's portrayed as, and I believe it is the true story, that Henry Hill goes into witness protection. But we saw him, he's given speeches at colleges before he passed away. Why was that a thing? Wasn't he still in some fear of, he put some powerful
yeah, but again, it's just,
bars.
I'm not trying to diminish a legitimate fear for safety. But things that have gone on in the last 25, 30 years, it's an era all of its own. He would not, my point is, if Henry Hill wouldn't have been able to do that in the 60s or 70s or even 80s, he was able to do that in the 90s and 2000s because it's a different era, because no one was going to risk their own freedom by taking out, frankly, a nobody like Henry Hill, even if he ended up putting Vario and Jimmy Burke behind bars. The only people that would have a true vendetta would be the Paulie's family. I mean, Jimmy the Gent's kid got whacked too, Frankie. But there are members of the Varios that are still around, and in theory, they could have had an issue with him. But other than them, nobody cared enough.
Do you think Henry Hill gets whacked if he doesn't turn on them first?
Yes, without question. And I want to tell another interesting anecdote that kind of, it's like a lost piece of this history that I didn't know until recently in the last couple of years. Henry Hill, and you do see this in the movie, when he goes down, he doesn't get busted by the feds. He got busted by the state authorities on a drug case out of Long Island, out of Suffolk County, which then opened the door for him flipping on the feds. But the Suffolk County case, and if you remember, his babysitter Lois needs to go get her hat, so he jumps in the car, and then you hear the cop, turn off the engine, you motherfucker, I'm gonna blow your fucking head off. And he's like, I thought I was dead. And then I realized only cops talk like that. If it was a wise guy, he wouldn't hear anything, he'd just be.
Yep.
And that entire bust could be traced to an 18-year-old kid that had been Henry Hill's lawn boy, a guy that was doing landscaping for Henry Hill and Karen in their house.
How'd that happen?
He was a son of a guy that was in their crew, so it was a mobster's son. And Henry Hill was dealing a lot of drugs at the very end of his mob career. And he was using this, I think he met the kid when he was 16 or 17. And he started using the kid to sell drugs at local high schools and then eventually local colleges. And when you see the scene at the diner, the last time Jimmy and Henry are together, and he says, he read these all out. I want you to go down to Florida and find this kid.
I would have never come back from that meeting alive.
Right. The guy that he's saying they want to kill is the 18-year-old kid.
Oh, so that's true.
And then they eventually kill him.
They killed the kid.
They killed the kid, 18 years old, May of 1980.
So Henry Hill really did know.
So Henry Hill got arrested,
down.
and then this guy got killed a couple weeks later. The kid, the 18-year-old kid.
Does that not make? Because I've read on the message board Reddit take is Henry Hill's a rat, but if you know they're gonna kill you, you betrayed me. You betrayed me first.
You're being pragmatic.
But you betrayed me. I just took my only option, because what am I gonna do? I'm not gonna go to war.
Yeah.
One against.
But you got to realize at that time again. Everything's context.
Is Henry Hill a rat?
At that, yeah, yes, he is. But
so you think you're going with the you're the Reddit guy?
But again, you have to. In some ways, you got to tip your hat to the guy, because doing what he did at that time, now everybody flips. Anybody gets in trouble, they flip now. The floodgates really opened after Sammy the Bull in the early '90s.
Well, they stopped killing. If you kill, you won't have that problem.
Well, they were still killing people then, and then maybe 10 years later they stopped killing. But the point is, when Henry Hill flipped, there weren't a lot of cooperators, so it was a very ballsy thing to do.
I mean,
But yeah, he was-
it would have
he-
been ballsy not to
Yeah.
to flip, and he was going down. I mean, they were going to kill him, or he was going to die in prison, right? I don't know. I don't think he's a rat. If you know, and you've confirmed, he knew I'm going down. They're going to kill me. They betrayed him first, so that fights against the he's a
but
rat. He turned against them. They turned against him.
But he also knew that he wasn't supposed to be doing what he was doing. He wasn't sharing the proceeds from this drug operation that he was running with Jimmy and those guys.
Is that why they wanted to kill him?
One of the reasons that he knew when that came out, everybody was like, wait, what? You were moving drugs back and forth from Florida with this teenager and moving all these drugs off in the Long Island suburbs, and us out in Brooklyn, we're not seeing any of it.
The most compelling, unanswerable question from either of the Scorsese entries into this genre, and I know there's the Irishman, which I don't count. Karen walking down the alley.
Yeah, I don't know if that really happened either. It's a great scene.
That's not true.
I don't know. I mean, it might have, but
Was she? I mean, she's alive now,
Yeah.
so obviously they didn't whack her. Do you think whether it was manifested like that scene was she ever in danger of getting whacked herself? Do you feel?
I don't think so because of Paulie.
So she was
Without Paulie, maybe.
Okay, let's talk about cinematically, artistically. Take off the expert hat. Just put on you're watching the movie. He's gonna.
Yeah, he's going to kill her.
You,
Right. Yes.
I
I
this
agree with
is
that.
a polarizing
Yeah.
subject. It is
No, I know
like
it.
50-50.
No, I believe he was going to kill her. That's why there was a guy back there.
Well, yeah. Well,
He was
maybe he
supposed to
was
be
handing her
pretending
the
the blouse
coat. He was
is-
going to sell her. Was it a coat or a blouse or whatever
Yeah.
it was? Just De Niro.
He was killing everybody. He like Henry said, he was cutting all ties, and she was still a tie to cut.
Do women get whacked like that in that world back then?
Teresa Ferrara got clipped.
I mean, there's exceptions, but that's pretty rare, right? Because
It's
there's
not-
a lot
right,
of
it's-
spouses that know stuff.
Yeah, but we're talking about Goodfellas right here. 2 of these murders were connected, or I should say, 3 of these murders were involving women. So Teresa Ferrara got killed. Angelo Seppi, when he was killed with his girlfriend. And just like you see in the film, I think in the film he's Johnny Roast Beef, but in real life he was Frankie Roast Beef. Frankie Roast Beef was running around with a pink Cadillac, acting like he had no cares in the world when everybody is, law enforcement wise, looking at the Jimmy DeGent crew, and they killed him and his wife.
But it's in his mother's name.
It was in my mother-in-law's name.
Yeah, mother-in-law. Thank you. Yeah, it's in my mother-in-law.
That's another one. That's one of the
you
most
stupid or what?
one of the most underrated scenes.
So good. What the fuck's the matter with you?
And then Carbone walks in with his wife in a mink coat.
Get it out of here.
You might as well wear a sign.
I love that when him and his wife are whacked in the pink Cadillac, it still has like the MSRP sticker on it. Scorsese
But
great.
those are 3 women that got caught in the crosshairs here.
So the pink Cadillac thing actually happened?
That actually happened, yeah. And to your question, I mean, it's not normally they're not going to kill women, but believe me, they're not opposed to killing women.
There's no code against it.
And especially if they think that woman knows stuff that she shouldn't know. So with the case of Frankie Roast Beef, who had been a cellmate of Jimmy DeGent in a prison sentence, that's how he got kind of brought into their crew.
Yeah.
Jimmy DeGent felt that Frankie Roast Beef's wife, I think her name was Joanna, that he was sharing too much with her, that she knew too much about their business. So especially if that's a factor there, they're going to, and I can think of a handful of instances in various parts of the country where a guy got his wife or girlfriend killed because he was involving that woman in things that he shouldn't have been involving her in.
Is Maury's Wigs guy a real guy?
Yes. Marty Krugman, Marty the Rug.
Is that why they called him the Rug?
Yeah, Marty the Rug Krugman. I think it was called For Men Only, or For Men's Only, I think was the name of the shop.
You got enough money
wig
for
shop.
that fucking commercial.
Yeah.
So
And
tell
the
me about
whole-
him. He's a real guy.
He's a real guy, and the whole Lufthansa heist did spawn from him. A guy that worked at the airport, a guy named Lou Werner, was someone who bet with, Maury or Marty in real life was a criminal who also owned a wig shop, but he booked bets. In the movie, you just look like he's making bets, but in reality, he was a bookie. And Lou Werner, who worked at the airport, owed Marty Krugman $25K, which is the equivalent of like $100,000 today. And in order to make good on the debt, he gave him the tip of the Lufthansa cargo terminal bringing in all this cash, which they thought was going to be $2 million. It turned out to be $6 million,
which is an absurd amount now with inflation. I mean, I thought the estimate was about 20 million today or thereabouts.
yeah.
That's insane. So did they actually whack him because he wouldn't shut the fuck up?
Yes.
So that's just, there's nothing to add to that.
Nope.
That's just how it happened.
Yep.
It's incredible how much of this shit actually is true.
Yep. And then to bring it into modern times, 5 years ago, I want to say, they brought charges in Lufthansa heist against a guy named Vinny Asaro, who had been. So back then, every mob family had a crew that was in charge of the airport, or was in charge of that family's activities at the airport. So when this heist goes down, you're, in theory, walking on other people's territory, so you have to grease them. So part of the monies from the take had to be spread around to the other crime families. And Vinny Asaro was the Bonanno crime family's representative for the airport. So he allegedly helped fence some of the jewelry, hide some of the money, and they found a way to charge him with it, in addition to a murder case that he was involved in allegedly with Jimmy the Gent in like 2017 or 18, and he beat the case. And there's only been one person actually convicted of Lufthansa.
And this was a few years ago, sorry.
This was a couple years ago, like 18, maybe 2018.
And he's in prison now?
No, he beat the case.
Oh, he beat it?
He beat the case.
So you said before we were talking off air that this is still kind of the Goodfellas story is still kind of going on?
That's what I meant.
That's what was the case you were talking about?
They brought this case in the 2010s. Only one person has actually been convicted of Lufthansa. It was Lou Werner, was convicted of orchestrating or sparking the flame that became Lufthansa.
So that's not why Henry Hill testified against Paul.
No, it had nothing to do with Lufthansa.
That was the most iconic crime. I mean, it was the most meaningful crime. Obviously, it's not murder.
Yeah, Paulie
in terms of,
and Jimmy did not go to prison for Lufthansa.
What were their charges?
Racketeering and murder.
Okay.
Jimmy actually went to, one of the reasons Jimmy went to prison for life was for the Meehook murder, which was not directly related, but tangentially related.
I've talked with my friend Chris Castellani about the greatest scenes in movie history, and my favorite is and not even that it's the greatest, although I could make the argument. My personal favorite scene in the history of cinema is from The Godfather, Michael, Vito in the garden of the Corleone house right before he passes, and it could be anybody. That's my number one. Somewhere in the top 5 is Henry on the first date, the first real date, non-double date, walking through the club with
It's
Karen.
considered like one of the all-time classic
It's
movie scenes, and
unbelievable.
it's for people that are cinephiles and for people that are actually like in the business in terms of lighting and sound and the way a shot is set up, stuff that regular people don't probably pay attention to. That was as like groundbreaking as almost any kind of movie shot, if you will. The one shot, following it, that, and the scene where he's introducing everybody at the lounge. When
Yes.
he walks in and those two scenes are considered like, in terms of shooting movies, it was like before those scenes and after those scenes that like it opened up a whole new way for directors to tell stories.
The tracking shot in that is fantastic and unrivaled. I think it's a top 5 scene in the history of cinema. I would argue.
And I also should point out that the scene where he's introducing the first part of the movie, where he's going around and the camera's hitting the faces of the different members of the crew, and he's introducing all those guys. 95% of those guys were real people.
That's a great time to like kind of rope them in too when you're going through like the list.
So like Jimmy Two Times, his name wasn't really Jimmy Two Times. It was Johnny Echoes, but it was the same.
A typical like Scorsese little twist. But the reason I bring up the scene, other than just the fact that I love it and I could watch it 1,000 times, that tracking scene, they're walking through, what do? You don't look like you feel like you're in construction and, don't you work? It's Liotta nails it. Maureen Bracco nails it. It's expert peak Scorsese. It's arguably the best Scorsese scene ever in terms of the execution.
Goodfellas is the perfect movie, in my opinion.
Well, I actually like Casino a little more, but
I didn't say I like Goodfellas better than Casino. I said it's the perfect movie.
Well, that's actually a good closing topic at the very end. I'll try not to forget that one. I'm in the rare camp. It's like 30.
You can argue that to me. I'm not.
It's close. I'm not like a pound the table. In the right mood, maybe I would argue the other way. I'm a slight edge to Casino. But that scene, that tracking scene walking through the club is so iconic. The reason I bring it up, I'm curious, is that the correct, accurate, in the spirit of a mobbed up, powerful guy vibe? Is that real? Where maybe they're not literally cutting through the kitchen, but where they show up at some bar, are they really that big of a celebrity?
Yes.
That was accurate.
Especially at the Copa, which that was.
So that was a true portrayal.
Yeah. Those guys, Red Sea parted for these guys. It still does. I see it. I see it with my own eyes.
Even now.
Yeah.
But they don't have any juice now.
So, I guess it depends on how you define juice, and it depends on where you are and who you're with.
I consider juice cutting through, and then they bring out a table for you, and you're cutting the line. To me, that's juice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's Brian Masalam at any Michigan State event. They bring out the table for him, and they fan him like he's an Egyptian pharaoh. But for most people, if your name's not Brian Masalam and you're not going through East Lansing, that's a atypical experience. So that was true that he would, even if that exact thing didn't happen, him coming in or Jimmy the Gent coming in, they would have that sort of part the Red Sea. I would have sworn you would say that was artistic license. I'm actually fascinated by that.
Especially then, especially in the 1960s.
One of the 5 best scenes ever, though.
Yeah.
I love even more that that's like an actual, true.
Roses are red.
Yeah. There's so many good scenes in that club, too. It's just, it goes on. And Pesci has so many good ones in there. So, yeah, I'll throw it to you here before we transition. Overall, percent-wise, they captured that story pretty well in Goodfellas.
Yeah, and I also I think it's important to note in terms of mob storytelling to point out the difference between The Godfather and Goodfellas, or the big mob movies that came before Goodfellas. They were always about big time powerful people. Don Corleone, Tony Montana. Goodfellas was great because for the most part, it's about the low-level guys. Other than Paulie, nobody's made in that crew that you see. None of those guys are actually members of the Mafia. They're all associates.
Yeah, Paulie's in there. He's on the movie poster. He's only actually in the movie for like 11 minutes.
Right. So my point is that's why it was so brilliant, and that's why it connected with so many people, because it was showing the grunts, and it's still glamorous as a grunt, but it's showing the minutia,
and accurately so. You would argue.
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add in Goodfellas before we move to Casino?
Nope.
And we'll wrap at the end with the kind of combining the two. But Casino, again, we'll finish later with why I think Casino is just a little bit better.
And Casino is happening, or fallout from what you saw in that movie is happening today in 2023 in real time.
Why is Casino, the story of Casino, still happening now?
Because over the last 15 months, the water level on Lake Mead, which is the biggest body of water in Nevada, has been precipitously dipping, and bodies are surfacing. And a number of these bodies are believed by investigators to tie back to the casino era, the Tony Spilotro reign, bloody reign over Vegas between 1971 and 1986. So, and possibly some murders that you see take place in the movie are potentially being resolved now in the 2020s.
Is there anybody with a pulse today that might be implicated by something they find there?
Yes.
Anything you can talk,
Yeah.
anyone you can talk about?
Right now there's a guy who was a very close friend and lieutenant of Tony Spilotro. Again, in the movie, he's Nicky Santoro, but in real life, he's Tony Spilotro. And he's named Paulie the Indian, Paul Shiro, who goes by Paulie the Indian. And recently got out of prison. He's in his 80s. And if they identify one of these bodies as someone they think it might be, Shiro is a suspect. And if they were inclined to indict an 80-something-year-old person for murder, and he has exposure here. And, just in Massachusetts a couple years ago, they indicted an 85-year-old guy, pulled him out of witness protection after 20 years and hit him with a cold case murder. Died in prison a couple months ago. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility. So yes, at least one person, if not more, have some legal exposure with these bodies surfacing.
And you have a lot of FBI contacts. You've interviewed a number of FBI agents in the course of your work. We've talked about it in the past in the first episode with you with Hoffa. What is their appetite to chase this stuff down?
Well, in Las Vegas right now, it's voracious. This is something that has a lot of eyeballs on it and a lot of pressure being applied by higher ups in law enforcement to try to put to bed some of these cold case murders, missing person cases tied to this very, very infamous period of that city's history. And I know that there are people in Clark County, as well as Clark County Sheriff's Department, as well as federal investigators out there that are right now working around the clock on these cold case murders that they think they could solve based on we've had like over half a dozen bodies that have surfaced. And according to environmental experts, you're going to have dozens more reach the surface over the next couple of years.
I'm fascinated by that because in the Scorsese portrayal, and maybe that was his perception, it's buttoned up. It's, in the end, we fucked it all up, and now you're lucky if you get room service by Tuesday, and it's the MGM Grand Lion and the Treasure Island shit and all that. Like, Scorsese's portrayal is, this was the story, it's closed now. You're saying the casino story is still wide open.
I'm saying some of the murders that you see happen, those bodies have never been found. Specifically, the murder of the character in the movie, it's John Nance. He's the guy that's in charge of the count room, who they find out in Costa Rica. Again, that's kind of they're conflating a bunch of facts. In real life, John Nance's real life counterpart was a guy named Jay Vandermark, and Vandermark disappeared. Nobody's ever seen Vandermark since 1976. So in the movie, he dies in the swimming pool. In real life, a guy named Jerry Lisner died in the swimming pool, and John Nance or Jay Vandermark disappeared. And that's the body. The first body to pop up was found in a barrel, like a rusted barrel, and had 2 bullets in the back of his head, or back of her head, I guess. I think they've established it's a male, back of his head. And Jay Vandermark is one of the people they're trying to connect to that body, as well as another guy named John Paginio Tacos, who went by the alias Johnny Pappas, and they both disappeared in a couple-week period of 1976, right after you see in the movie when they raid the casino.
Yep.
So right after they raid the casino, 2 people disappeared.
I was drinking Miller Lights and rolling rocks with my buddies in college and watching Casino one night, and I had a take that they did not like. I said that Sam Ace Rothstein was my favorite character in any Scorsese film ever, including Goodfellas. And I love Jimmy the Gent. And I talked about both of my favorite characters are De Niro's characters in both.
I want an equal amount of blueberries in each muffin.
I loved it. And my dad actually would use him because he loves these movies too. So I'd be watching these with him. He would use Sam as sort of a role model, not entirely, preferably, hey man, have better taste in women in particular. But he would tell me, watch how he handles things seriously and watch how particular he is and watch how he runs things and he's on top of things. And my dad was and is an entrepreneur and started his own business, and he worshiped Sam and I worshiped my dad, so I kind of worshiped Sam by proxy. Sam Ace Rothstein, not the real guy's name. Then throw up our side by side.
It's Lefty Rosenthal.
Frank Lefty Rosenthal.
Yeah.
Actually Jewish, as portrayed in the movie, right?
Yeah.
So how close are we with the portrayal of Sam Rothstein? De Niro nailed the gent. How much sort of overlap is here, fact versus fiction?
Identical.
Identical again.
The only, and it's a pretty big difference, I guess, but this is stuff that they didn't know at the time of making the movie. It didn't come out until after Lefty Rosenthal died. But in reality, during that entire time period, Lefty Rosenthal was a confidential informant and feeding information to the FBI on Tony Spilotro. So you didn't see that part where he was playing both sides.
That completely changes everything.
Right. But other than that, the character was on point.
So was he that brilliant of a guy, that sharp, that
he played? I mean, the smartest guys in the world of organized crime play both sides of the fence.
He's portrayed as this brilliant sports.
He's one of the all-time in the world of underworld gambling. He is a legend's legend.
So that was all legitimate.
Yeah, and him and Tony grew up, or Nicky in the movie, Tony in real life, grew up together in Chicago. Tony was his muscle. Lefty Rosenthal was a golden boy for the Italian mob bosses in Chicago. They loved him because he made them so much money and told them who to bet on, because some of them were degenerate gamblers, like you see with the Remo character, who is a composite, but it's based on Joey Dove's Iupa. But everything you see in terms of his anal retentive nature or his meticulous nature of running that casino was 100% accurate. And the sign that you see in his office behind him that has like a giant no and a very little yes, that was actually from Lefty Rosenthal's office. Lefty Rosenthal gave it to him to use.
Is it the actual one?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible, actually.
So Lefty Rosenthal wanted to have nothing to do with the production until he found out that De Niro was involved. Yeah. And then he came running to them.
Oh, so would I.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe the best actor ever.
Right, and then he coached De Niro on how to play him.
So he was involved with De Niro's portrayal directly.
Yeah. And so was the character of Frank Marino, played by Frank Vincent, who was also in The Sopranos, was Billy Batts in Goodfellas.
Yeah, recently passed.
Frank Marino is based on Frank Collada, who was Tony Spilotro's right hand. And he was him and Lefty were the main technical consultants on set.
So he was informing against the ant.
Lefty was informing on everybody. All the mobsters, all the mob bosses in Chicago, too. All the mobsters in Chicago. Yeah.
Did they know that?
Nobody knew it until he died.
He took it to the grave.
Yeah, nobody knew.
How did that come out?
Some newspaper broke it in the couple weeks after Rosenthal died. Got tipped off.
Did any arrest result as his? Did any arrest come as a result of his informing?
I would say definitely, but nothing where he had to like testify.
I never knew that, and I've read about the background on it.
So it would be called, a dry snitch is the term they use in the underworld. It is somebody that informs and is given preferential treatment or money, but in return doesn't actually have to take the stand. He's dry, doesn't have to get wet.
Did they actually try to kill him?
Yes, that happened.
How did that happen in real life?
Just like you see in the movie.
They bugged his car, didn't work?
He's walking out of a lunch meeting. He's in front of he's in a parking lot that was shared by Marie Callender and Tony Roma's place for ribs, right in downtown Vegas. And no one knows for sure who planted the bomb, but I'll say definitively, and I'm 99% certain that Spilotro was behind that bombing, wanted to kill Lefty. But that bombing and trying to kill Lefty against the wishes of the Chicago mob had nothing to do with why Spilotro was eventually killed. They try to make it seem like in the movie that was connected. I mean, if you're Jewish or Irish or you're not Italian, you're just not gonna be able to like the Jimmy the Gent thing. Like what I was trying to explain was a unicorn of a situation. Normally, no matter how high you could rise as a non-Italian, you're always going to be on the losing end of certain things because you're not Italian.
You're not going to inspire the assassination of somebody else within the Italian.
They just looked at it as like, okay, we didn't want him to do it, but he did it. We're not going to kill him for it. If it was an Italian guy he tried to do that to, another maid guy he tried to do that to, they would have killed him.
Why did Spilotro, Nicky Santoro, want him dead? In real life.
He felt betrayed by him. How you saw that relationship fray in the movie is what happened. There became a bitter rivalry between the two. They both blamed each other for the other one's problems, or they blamed the other one for their own problems. Tony Spilotro was sleeping with, in the movie Ginger. In real life, her name was Jerry. In the movie, it's Ginger McKenna. In real life, it was Jerry McGee. That was simply to show Lefty that he could do it. Tony Spilotro at that point could sleep with any woman in Vegas.
Sharon Stone,
No, I know. I'm just saying
1995.
I'm saying that
there's more reasons than just to show you can.
I'm saying in the 70s when that was happening, a lot of it was him trying to put Lefty in his place.
So you think that was more purposeful and more Machiavellian than it was lust?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Put him in his place for what?
He felt like, just like you seen in the movie, that Rosenthal felt like, or Santoro felt that Rothstein or Spilotro felt that Rosenthal was getting too big for his britches, and had Spilotro believed that Rosenthal thought that he had more juice than Spilotro, and that he was more of an asset to the bosses back in Chicago than Spilotro was, that he was doing business the right way when Spilotro was doing business the wrong way, that Spilotro's behavior was actually threatening the mob's investment there, when Spilotro felt like it was Rosenthal going on television and making a whole scene and being all dramatic, whether it be at the licensing hearing, which again that really happened, just like you see in the movie, or having his own local access television show, local cable access, which really happened. If you asked Spilotro, that was where the heat was coming from. If you asked Rosenthal, the heat was coming from Tony Spilotro, killing more people in his first 5 years in Vegas than the previous 50 years in Vegas.
Was it actually problematic from the mob boss perspective that Spilotro was sleeping with Jerry?
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing they don't like these guys, that's true.
that is true.
That
But
was
not to the
problematic.
point where they were going to whack him.
Okay, let's talk about Jerry a little bit. Ben, let's throw up the side-by-side. Geraldine McGee. McGee. It's another one of those where I pulled it up and I heard someone say McGee. I'm like, there's no way. That looks like McGee to me. So Geraldine McGee, Jerry, who, I don't know, she kind of looks a little like similar there, honestly. I've seen different pictures where she didn't look.
And she really had a James Woods Lester Diamond.
Well, I'm actually going to ask you about Lester Diamond.
I can't remember what his real name was.
But there's no Lester Diamond.
There's no Lester Diamond, but
There's a Lester Diamond character.
There was a person that I can't remember his real name, but was what Lester Diamond was in the movie.
Tell me about Sharon Stone as Jerry. Are we?
Yeah, it was a very accurate
true?
portrayal. I mean, she had the city wired. She was a mover and a shaker, and someone that didn't love Lefty Rosenthal, but loved everything that Lefty Rosenthal brought to the table in terms of a partner, and access, celebrity, money, power.
Why did Lefty marry her?
Lefty was legitimately in love with her. He was, that was an obsession. I mean, he was consumed with her.
So that dynamic is That sounds like you're describing the movie, basically.
Yes. And he also saw her as a status symbol.
But she had juice before she even met him.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, she was juicing around there with someone that knew how to leverage access, keep everyone happy, grease as many wheels as you can.
Jerry is portrayed, as Ginger, obviously, in the film. I would argue, and maybe some would disagree, but I would argue Ginger is portrayed as, for lack of a better term, the femme fatale. She's the not entire reason, but the biggest reason and the first domino in the collapse of this whole thing. Is that fair in how it actually happened? Did she play this role where she was the powder keg?
Yeah, well, she came between Tony and Lefty, which took the temperature on that situation up to 1,000. I don't know what would happen without her in the equation, but there's no question that she stoked the flames and took it to the point where they both wanted to kill each other. And yeah, the only reason, if he tried to kill him. I mean, if it wasn't for that manufacturing oddity, he would have been dead. But at that point, he couldn't go back at him. The bosses wouldn't allow him to go back at him. And he kind of had to let sleeping dogs lie. And at that point, she left town. And just like they tell you in the movie, she took the money that she had gotten from Lefty and went to L.A. and spent it in a couple months and got hooked up with some bikers. And the bikers were reaching out to Rothstein or to Rosenthal to try to extort him. He was sending guys to L.A. to try to fight the bikers because he still thought he could somehow get her back. And
she took it to the end with her.
Yeah, and she, OD'd in a sleazy Los Angeles hotel like shortly after the car bomb.
So she's in L.A. shortly before Odin, and he is still clinging to, I'm going to get her back.
Well, he was also offended that these bikers would come at him. He basically, to what Tony Spilotro was saying was true. He, with those casinos and with him being in his mind the king of Vegas, meaning Lefty, he thought he was untouchable. He thought he was John Gotti. That's a part. I think they show that a little bit. that part I don't know. So that part of the portrayal was kind of, I think, left out a little bit, that he was throwing his weight around like a mob guy. You see it a little bit in the movie.
She says to him, "Oh, so what? Who blew you in the parking lot?" Did he actually have side pieces?
Yeah, he had side pieces too.
Okay, because they don't. That's the only inference that I'm aware of, and that I can recall in that entire film, where there's a little bit of that. Because when she says, "Who blew you in the parking lot?"
But that's the ultimate double standard in that world. You know, a mob guy or a mob associate's allowed to have as many girlfriends as he wants, and a wife, but the wife nor the girlfriends have any freedom to go sleep with other guys.
So she was out of line and he wasn't by the rules of the Mafia. Okay. It is interesting because Scorsese clearly did not want to feature that, and I think it would have made him less sympathetic as this guy. They kind
of infer it in one scene.
I just said the one, right? There's another one? When the who blew you in the parking lot is a clear like.
No, but there was another scene where they have him at the it's in the 80s and they start playing Talking Heads music and they're at the club and it's him, Frank Marino, and some other people, and he's got the woman who was the co-host on his television show sitting next to him in the booth.
Yeah.
And in real life, that was one of his
all right.
girlfriends.
They definitely.
But you have to kind of know.
Yeah.
I've
seen the movie 1,000 times that I didn't even like.
And that's when he says, "I look at Oscar," and he was referring to Oscar Goodman, the future mayor of Las Vegas. At that time, Oscar was the big mob attorney, and they're saying, "Hey, look at Oscar. All those guys are having a good time. All those Jews, sticking together, not giving us the time of day."
Did Lefty die of natural causes?
Yeah, Lefty died of natural causes. Living in Florida.
Was he ever in any risk of?
No, we found out later he was protected. That's why he never got locked up. Which really, when you think about it, I don't know why it took people so long to figure that out. Because he was right in the middle of all of that, and everybody went to prison. But he never even had to go to court.
And the Mafia had no idea, you said, until he died. That's a bad job by them.
Yeah.
That's a bad job by them.
You had 10 Mafia dons go to prison because of what happened in that movie. And not from one city, like from 5 or 6 different cities.
You've touched on it. Go a little bit deeper. Nicky Santoro, for most people, I think the most resonant character, the most quoted character in this film for sure.
You made me pop your eye out. Protect that motherfucker.
Charlie M. And that piece of shit.
And that really happened.
Oh, God. So the Charlie M. eye-popping incident occurred.
Yeah, it was but it didn't. Again, they conflated some facts. It didn't happen in Las Vegas.
I don't care about what hallway it took.
Well, I'm just telling you, it didn't happen during Tony Spilotro's Las Vegas reign. It happened before he got to Las Vegas.
What happened
when he was in Chicago?
What happened?
Just like you see in the movie, two guys, Charlie Miraglia and Jimmy.
The guy's name was actually Charlie M.
Let me see. Hold on, I have it written down. Two guys go into a mobbed up bar in Chicago in the 1960s and shoot it up. They end up killing a waitress. The bar owner was connected to some mob bosses. He was very close to the waitress, very upset that the waitress had been killed, was upset that his bar had got shot up. The name would be Billy McCarthy and Jimmy Miraglia. It was known in the Chicago press as the M&M murders. And it happened in 1962. They shoot the place up. At that point, Spilotro had just been inducted, made member, and was being utilized by the murder squad in the Chicago Mafia. One of his mentors was a guy named Milwaukee Phil Aldericio. Felix Aldericio, Milwaukee Phil. And Milwaukee Phil would handle a lot of the murders in the 1960s, and he put Spilotro on the job, as well as Frank Collada in the movie Frank Marino. And they tracked these guys down. Well, they tracked one of them down. And they put his head in a vice to give them the name of the other guy and where he was. So I think they killed. I got it in my notes.
Was it a mercy killing like it's portrayed? Like they popped his eye out? Do him a fucking favor.
So they killed McCarthy, wanting him to give up Jimmy Miraglia, and he did. And then Miraglia is killed the very next day, and they're stacked on top of each other and put in the back of Miraglia's Cadillac.
Tell me about Pesci's portrayal at large in general. You said he didn't swear much. The real
that's what I heard. I got to interview Frank Collada, who was the Frank Marino character, and he said that was really the only big difference is that he didn't have the F-bombs weren't dropping every 30 seconds like you see in the film. But other than that, that was kind of who Tony Spilotro was.
So his sort of attitude and flying off the handle and recklessness, he's portrayed as this guy that's like flying in the face of the mob bosses.
Vegas went to his head. I mean, just like you see in the movie. Him being 1,000 miles away from Chicago was the worst thing that could ever happen to him. He felt like, he was invincible. He was unchecked. He felt like he had enough support in Chicago that it didn't matter what he did there, that the guys in Chicago would watch his back. And again, it was true to an extent. Joey Doves, the Remo character, really liked Tony Spilotro. And just like we were talking about with other people, over the years, a number of people went to the Chicago mob bosses and were like, we want to kill Tony Spilotro. And Joey Doves and another guy named Joey the Clown Lombardo, and back in the 60s, Milwaukee Phil, they protected him. But when he was sent out to Vegas to run the Chicago mob operations in the desert, like I said a couple minutes ago, there were 25 murders in the first 2-3 years. There hadn't been 25 murders in Las Vegas for 30 years. He accumulated a body total in 3 years that hadn't been accumulated in the previous 30.
He was just whacking everybody. Without approval. And he needed approval,
at that point, he had approval. At that point, they're like, go to Chicago and get everything in order.
Okay.
Now, what he didn't have approval of was when he started to run street rackets there. He was just sent there to look after the skim and what operations within the legal gambling industry there. He saw Vegas as untapped territory. I mean, nobody was there shaking down bookmakers. Nobody was down there extorting businesses or loaning out money, doing high-end burglaries. And it was the potential he saw overwhelmed him, and he immediately jumped in head first and got everybody in line and was running street rackets not quietly because he was killing people, but the guys in Chicago didn't really understand the amount of extracurricular activities that Spilotro was involved in outside of just looking after the casinos and the stealing that was going on there.
How did the real life Nicky Santoro meet his end? How did he die?
In real life, he was killed in a very similar way that you see in the movie, except it didn't take place in a cornfield. It took place in the basement of a Chicago residence where he was. And I think this is also very emblematic and encapsulates how much hatred and bitterness had accrued against him. And by the time he was killed in 86, and like I said, that was 4 years after the car bombing. So it really had nothing to do with the car bombing. But what you did see in some dialogue in that movie is when Sam Ace Rothstein says, I don't want to do anything you're talking about. Like, keep me out of that. What he was saying, and I think the Spilotro character said before him, like, if I do what I want to do, you're not going to have to ask for permission anymore.
You're not even going to need a license.
Right, need a license. Yeah. So what he was saying is, I'm intending to take over the entire Chicago Mafia. I'm going to kill my way to the top. And then I'm going to be controlling everything from Vegas. And word got back to the guys in Chicago that he was talking about killing those guys. Now, a lot of those guys were headed to prison because of what happened in Vegas. He saw them heading to prison as a vacuum for him to fill.
It's an opening.
Right. So specifically, Joey Dove's Iupa goes to prison in January of 1986. And he's replaced by a guy named Joe Ferriola. And Joe Ferriola disdains Tony Spilotro. And, you know, again, it's something that most people probably don't know is when you get a promotion like that in the Mafia, you become boss. Normally they hold an inauguration, like, a ceremony to bring you in as the boss. And Variola had a ceremony in, I think it was February of 86. And it was at a place called the Czech Lodge and had a private room and had all of the major players in the Chicago Mafia. And Joe Ferriola stood up to address his new men. And the first thing he said is, my first order of business as the new boss is to go out to Vegas and kill that little motherfucker.
That's the first thing he said.
Yeah.
With the Chiefs hat on.
Yeah. And he's like, this is our first order of business right now. He's caused all of us all these problems, and he's running his mouth about killing us. So not only did they kill him the way you saw in the movie, where they beat him to death with baseball bats, strangled him, stomped him to death in front of, or made him watch his little brother get murdered before they murdered him. That all happened. But they did it with an audience. All of the Chicago Mafia, now it's, for murders in the Mafia, the actual bosses, they want to be as far away from the actual murder itself as possible. Like, if they know the murder is happening on a Monday, they're on a plane to Florida the Friday before that. So they have plausible deniability.
Get that alibi.
Yeah. But in Chicago, there was so much hatred for Spilotro, the mob shot callers wanted to be there to witness it. So he was called to, just like you see in the movie Goodfellas, he was called to a making ceremony. He was living in Vegas. They told him that your brother's going to be inducted and you're going to be promoted to a capo spot. He was already a capo for all intents and purposes. So he flies home to Chicago on a Friday. He's supposed to come back on a Monday. The ceremony is supposed to be on a Saturday, I think. Or maybe it was supposed to be a Sunday. It was either Saturday or Sunday. And him and his brother knew it was a 50-50. Like, they gave all their jewelry and all their cash and all their wallets to their loved ones and said, if we're not back by dinner, they went at like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. They said, if we're not back by dinner time, something bad happened. So they get picked up by a guy named Jimmy Marcello, who eventually becomes the boss of the Chicago Mafia years later. And Marcello picks them up at a hotel. They leave their car, go have a drink at the hotel bar, get in the car to go to this ceremony. And when they first walk in, they're greeted with hugs upstairs. And they see all these mob bosses. So they think, well, they wouldn't kill us with the sitting mob administration right here. And then they're like, okay, let's go downstairs and have the ceremony. And then when they started to walk downstairs, they realized that it actually was a slaughter. And there were a bunch of hitmen waiting for them downstairs. And the bosses came and took a seat to watch it.
Were they actually, or at least in his case, was he buried alive?
Yeah. There's still some speculation about that. I sense that he probably wasn't, now that we have 40 years removed from it or not. But I know that initial reports was that he had like sand in his lungs from breathing the where he'd been buried. And so where he was buried was in a cornfield. Okay. That's where they get the and the burial got fucked up.
How?
So they give like I said, it's very systematic. Yeah. Where, one crew's in charge of one thing, one crew's in charge of another thing. So they have a whole cleanup crew that had nothing to do with the actual murder, but is there to come and clean the basement and remove the bodies to, in this case, they wanted to take them over to the state line of Indiana and bury them in Indiana, Northwest Indiana. So a guy by the name of Albert Taco, they called him Caesar the Fox. another guy named Big John Theckerata were put in charge of the burial, and they got lost when they were going to bury the bodies in Indiana. It was the middle of the night. Taco's got his 2 or 3 of his subordinates digging a hole. He's in a car. He somehow loses them in the cornfield. Can't find them. They see lights. They think the lights are cops. It's just like a farmer driving somewhere. They all bolt. The bodies are not even fully in the ground. Albert Taco can't find his crew members. So it's kind of like every man for himself at that point. They get into the car and leave Taco because they don't know where Taco is. He walks to a payphone. He's in work clothes with blood all over him and calls his wife to pick him up. So his wife, Betty, comes and picks him up. Eventually they get divorced. And Betty, runs the FBI.
So that's how this whole thing happened.
One of
the truth came out.
Well, yeah, and then John Theckerata, even though he wasn't the one that got lost in the cornfield, Taco was. You would think that Taco would have to bear the brunt of that, but he survived it. They killed Theckerata instead.
So, Scott, I invited you to do the show tonight, but if someone had told you, hey, you show up in Spiro's basement, coin flip that you come out of there alive.
Yeah, I'm bolting.
I'm guessing you don't show up.
No, I know. But
why did he show up?
Because this is just the life that these guys choose. I mean,
did he have a choice not to show up?
In theory, but in practice, he knows how far can I run? They're going to find me.
That's fascinating. So
I could go, run into the arms of the FBI, but that's something that was probably against every, fiber in his body.
So he's giving his stuff away, him and his brother. What did his brother do? Why did his brother?
His brother was just someone that, it was his youngest brother. He idolized Tony, wanted to be like Tony, was a tough guy, was also because of their connections in Hollywood, Michael, they called him Mickey. He appeared in some Magnum PI episodes. They were buddies with, I think his name is Larry Manetti. He played one of the main characters on Magnum PI. And I think he was in another, maybe a Fantasy Island episode or something. So Michael was a wannabe Tony, and they worried that if they killed Tony and left Michael, that Michael would, was a bit of a cowboy like his brother, and that his brother would, try to exact vengeance. So they killed both of them.
It was more of a preemptive strike.
Yeah. The other brothers were still around and existed in the outfit orbit for years after that. And they didn't feel like John and Victor, who were the 2 other big mobster brothers of Tony, they didn't feel like they would have problems with him, and they left them. They allowed those guys to live.
Is that the only murder that you're aware of where mob bosses not only were present but made a point to be present?
Yes.
And that is entirely...
It's very, very rare. Maybe it's never even happened before.
It might be a 101. Yeah. And that's bred from their contempt for him?
Yeah.
That's fascinating. And that's better than what they showed. Why didn't Scorsese use that? That's better than what happened.
Yeah. Well, because they didn't know. All this stuff, and where my expertise comes in is when all of these events are finally adjudicated, and it's 20 years later, and it's 2005, and the murders are finally charged. And a bunch of the specifics that they didn't know in the 80s or 90s when Scorsese was making the movie started to be revealed. And I covered, that was my first kind of made my bones as a mob reporter, covering that trial. And that's where I wrote my book from that trial. And a lot of that stuff nobody knew until it came out in the 2007 trial that found, that resulted in convictions for the 2 Spilotro brothers killers.
The moron cowboy brother-in-law that didn't see the 3 jackpots in a row and that there's a problem, and there was a congressman.
The cowboy guy?
Yeah. Well,
that part was true, too, that they were running into problems with these kind of old school hillbilly, I don't want to say mob guys, but powerful entities within the city that expected kickbacks and jobs and preferential treatment. And Tony Spilotro was like, I don't give a fuck if you're some wannabe hillbilly gangster from Nevada. Like, I'm Tony Spilotro from Chicago.
But it was Lefty's the one that didn't play ball in the film, though. It's Ace. It's not.
No, I know both of them.
Okay,
but
so
I'm
it
saying
was
they were
both.
both butting. I'm saying from the time they got to Vegas, both those guys were butting heads with a lot of the
Old guard. It wired in,
Yeah.
tapped in. But
they show you in the movie, it looks like one of them's working with Tony.
But in the movie, it's portrayed as part of the reason the law came down on Lefty, his lack of willingness to continue indulging this.
Yes.
That's true.
Yeah.
What element of that actually happened? Like, what was there actually a guy that didn't see 3 jackpots in a row and all that?
Well, I don't know about that part, but the part where Pat Webb, who was a real person, shows up in his office and kind of says, like, what's going on here? Like, I want you to treat us with the respect that we deserve as being people that have been here before you ever knew what Las Vegas was, or before you ever had an idea of coming out here and trying to spread the Chicago mob brand.
Yeah.
And that there was a real battle between Webb and Rosenthal.
There's so many, like, you could do an hour, I feel like, on this little 30-second scene, this 30-second. I'm fascinated by it. I could have you back and just go through this entire both movies again. There's so many components of it.
And this is one, just how crazy it is sometimes, and how fate plays a role. None of what happened with those convictions, it was a historic case called Operation Family Secrets, the biggest mafia prosecution in American history after Rudy Giuliani's commission case in New York. The U.S. attorney in Chicago kind of one-upped him in a little bit. It was a huge case, brought it in 2005, 3 or 4 month trial in 2007, adjudicated 18 cold case murders dating back all the way to 1970. And none of that would have been possible if it wasn't for a total fluke or a couple things. So the burial is botched, and they want to kill the guy that botched the burial, this John Feckerata, who was, I guess he was in charge of the people that botched the burial. And they assign these 2 brothers, the Calabrese brothers, to kill him. And they lure him. They say, we're going to go rob a place. And they pick him up. We're going to a robbery, when in reality they're going to kill him. And they're driving, and I think they stop somewhere, and they turn around. One of the brothers is in the passenger seat, one of the brothers is in the driver's seat, and Feckerata's in the back. And the brother in the passenger seat turns around and shoots Feckerata. Feckerata had a gun and was a big guy, and he even though he takes a shot, he grabs the hand of Nicky Calabrese, and they're fighting, and they fall out of the car, and Feckerata's got a gun on him, and he shoots the shooter, Nicky Calabrese, in the shoulder, and then takes off. Nicky Calabrese gets up and runs after him. He catches him in a bingo hall, in the vestibule of a bingo hall, and puts 2 in the back of Feckerata's head. As he's running back to his brother in the getaway car, Nicky Calabrese drops his glove. So in 1986, the feds have a bloody glove, but they have no one to match it to. Fast forward into the 2000s, the Calabreses are in prison for something else related to racketeering, and Nicky and Frank Calabrese are in different prisons, and Frank Calabrese has a son, Frank Jr., who despises his dad. And when he's in prison, he reaches out to the FBI and says, I want to build a case against my dad and my uncle for you. And oh, by the way, you know that bloody glove that you've been looking to connect to somebody for the last 18 years? It's my uncle. And my uncle and my dad are the guys that killed Feckerata. So they go to Nicky Calabrese in prison, and they say, all right, so we're going to get a DNA swab from you. and we're going to get a X-ray, and we're going to X-ray your shoulder. And that X-ray is going to light up like a Christmas tree because we know you got a bullet in your shoulder. And the DNA is going to match because we know that's your blood on the glove. And they leveraged that for Nicky Calabrese to become the first ever member of the Chicago Mafia to turn government witness because of that. And he was one of the killers of the Spilotro brothers. And he told them the whole story of how the Spilotro brothers were lured
That's how
and
we
murdered.
know.
Yeah.
He's already in prison, so why turn?
Because they were going to kill Nicky.
Oh, okay.
His own brother was going to kill him. And they were going to kill him in prison.
Why get involved in this world, Scott? I
Yeah.
mean, my God. There's just like,
Because and then
they're all banging each other's wives.
and what's also nuts, and luckily for Nicky, he just died this year actually in witness protection. But they almost found him in witness protection. They had a dirty U.S. Marshal, and they had like located him after he had flipped. And luckily it was prevented. But
How was it prevented?
I don't know exactly, but they found
prevented on the Mafia side or prevented on
like
the law.
The U.S. Marshal was going to tip off the Chicago mob to where they were hiding Nicky Calabrese so they could kill him before he could ever take the stand in the Spilotro trial.
Is that the worst thing you can do in the Mafia? Is flip againth them, turn rat?
Yeah.
Is that the biggest offense?
Yeah.
Other than maybe killing a
Yeah.
Don or something.
But that brought, all those murders and all the stuff that had happened in the 70s and 80s was sitting there unresolved until the 2007 trial when all those guys were convicted. So it took 21 years to finally get justice.
Do you consider Goodfellas and Casino equally effective at portraying the reality of what happened?
Yes.
They are equals in that regard.
I wish, this is a nitpick. I wish in Casino they wouldn't have said back home. They never said Chicago. I wish they would have specified that this was the Chicago Mafia. This was the Chicago outfit, as they're called. They're the ones that are the tip of the spear when it came to Las Vegas. New York really had nothing to do with Vegas. It was a Midwest thing. It was Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Kansas City, St. Louis.
Have you had you mentioned a Goodfellas conversation. Have you had a Casino conversation with a member of the Mafia that was involved in this?
Yeah, in Chicago, yeah.
What's their perception of the film? Do they like it?
Yeah. They all... Tony Spilotro is someone who has a lot of mythology, today, even today in the 2020s. Even though he ended the way he ended, there are still people on the streets of Chicago that love telling Tony Spilotro war stories.
But they hated him.
But the powers that be hated him.
The powers hated him.
The powers that be hated him.
The street guys
liked him.
He was pretty ruthless, though.
Yeah, and he was ambitious, and a lot of people are like, things go a different direction. Maybe he does take over and kill his way to the top of the outfit, and he's someone that is still on the streets thought of in very high regard, even though the bosses back then, wanted to see him slaughtered. They wanted their pound of flesh. But he is one of him and Sam Giancana, Al Capone. That's all kind of in the same. It's just he's an urban legend, a cult hero in some ways.
The most resonant character probably from that film, although
nobody liked Lefty. That was
nobody liked Lefty.
Nobody liked Lefty.
I thought they all liked Lefty.
No, they respected Lefty, and they knew that Lefty was a huge earner, and Lefty was very good at his job.
Yeah,
but people liked Tony Spilotro. People didn't really like Lefty Rosenthal.
But the bosses liked Lefty.
The bosses liked Lefty because he made them a lot of money.
Yeah, so Spilotro's the man of the people, and Lefty's the.
Well, to make it to tie it into headlines today with. Billy Walters, the gambler who's come out, wrote that book and starting to talk about Phil Mickelson and all that stuff.
Yes.
In that book, he's got a good story about how he had to leave town. He had to leave Vegas for 2 years because of Spilotro. And he talks about in that book a lunch he had with Benny Binion who was a gangster in Texas before he came to Las Vegas and reinvented himself as the inventor of the World Series of Poker. But Benny Binion was one of the biggest gangsters the state of Texas has ever seen.
You are a fan of the films. Obviously, you're a big Scorsese fan. You're a cinephile. And you're also, a top 5 expert in this field outside of people that are actually in the mob?
I would humbly say that I'm the number one American organized crime expert.
And you have a case for that, for sure.
Thank you.
Let's say I hate you and I'm putting you 4th. You're definitely in the top 5. You're number 1 in my book.
Thank you.
But no one could dispute that you are, if not number 1, one of the most foremost experts in this.
Scott's the best.
Ben is. I agree. I'm just saying, let's say I hate you.
Yeah.
Even your biggest hater could not argue that you are one of the foremost experts in this field.
And Scott definitely does have haters.
We talked a little bit about some of them.
Very dangerous men that don't like me.
Yeah, you have a lot of guys with names like they sound like a character from one of these Scorsese films that are not fans of yours. And we talked last time about the call you got from prison or something. Yeah,
I got a text from prison.
A text from prison, which is, I've had a couple of phone conversations from prison that were controversial, but not of a threatening nature. So here's where I want to go with this, and this is kind of where I want to wrap and wrap it how you see fit. But comparatively, and I'm a huge fan of both, so I don't want to pit them against each other. But as someone that is, as we mentioned, an expert in this field who enjoys them, what is the superior entry into this genre? Knowing what you know and, your background and your expertise, what is the better film as an expert in this field? Goodfellas or Casino?
In terms of the nuts and bolts of organized crime and the day-to-day machinations,
yes,
it's Goodfellas is a better film in that regard. But I'm definitely open to the less popular opinion that Casino is a more entertaining movie or maybe a better movie in terms of actual cinema or movie making. Yeah, I know it's not the consensus. It's the
minority opinion.
The outlier opinion.
Yeah.
But I think you can make it. And I find watching Casino just as enjoyable for the 1,000th time than I do Goodfellas. But I still say Goodfellas is just it's just a perfect film. I don't see any flaws with it. There's nothing that I would trim from it. There's nothing that I would add to it. And for describing or depicting the everyday life of the mafia, it's just it's perfect. It hits every note. But Casino is great in its own right. It's a different story. It's told different. Yes, you have the voiceovers and you have the usual Scorsese brilliance. But you're talking about different parts of the country, different organizations. The way they do things in Chicago is different than they do things in New York. This wasn't even taking place in Chicago. It was Chicago guys operating in Las Vegas in the 70s. So as opposed to Goodfellas, which was taking you from the 50s all the way up into the 80s.
Is the Goodfellas entry the best entry in this genre? Is Goodfellas the best?
Well, I think Godfather or Godfather 2 is the greatest movie of all time.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the balance of entertainment and true reflections. Is Goodfellas the best?
I'd say Goodfellas is yes.
Okay. And Casino's.
If you sat there and argued to me that Casino is a better movie and had taken away the reality or the what I just. I'm not going to argue with you. You could argue that to me, and I could end up agreeing with you. I love Casino.
Sharon Stone in Casino is a top 25 acting performance in the history of Hollywood. I don't know where it might be 18th or 8th. There's no way 25 better performances have taken place.
I guess I wouldn't even say this is a critique.
No, not about her. Come on.
No, I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about the movie. I'm saying with Goodfellas, there's probably nothing that I would trim. Casino, there might be a couple little trims I would make if I was the editor of that movie. There was a couple things that got a little bit. I'm trying to remember specifically.
I can't think of one scene I'd be like, I can't see that. I mean, we could talk about after maybe, but I don't see that. So putting a button on it, you're a Goodfellas guy, but you're also a Casino guy.
I didn't write a book about Goodfellas. I wrote a book about Casino. So
I'm in the rare camp. I'm the Casino guy. Finish here. Did you feel a little bit betrayed by The Irishman, which I have not seen, but I have heard every expert in the field seems to say it's an abomination.
It's blasphemy.
It's blasphemy. That's another one we'll use. Did you feel betrayed from Scorsese, who made these two? You called one of them, Goodfellas, a perfect entry into the genre. Did you feel a little bit like, come on, Martin?
I think it was a wasted opportunity. Martin Scorsese could have done a Jimmy Hoffa movie, and it could have been just as good as Goodfellas and Casino. But instead, him and Robert De Niro decided to take the story of a known liar, a known drunk, somebody that didn't have anywhere near the amount of power and sway and presence that he made it out to be in his book. I'm speaking about Frank Sheeran and his book, I Heard You Paint Houses. I know a lot of specifics about the book deal, how that book deal got made. I have no problem sharing them. Frank Sheeran shopped that book twice without saying anything about Jimmy Hoffa, and nobody bought it because nobody cares about Frank Sheeran, because there's no reason to care about Frank Sheeran. He was a Teamsters boss from Delaware. I mean, that's all you need to know.
Yeah.
And then the third time, he sat with an agent that used to be my agent, and it was told to him that if you want to sell this book, you should put in there that you killed Jimmy Hoffa. And that's what he did. And they sold the book. And then Scorsese and De Niro came and scooped it up. And more power to him. You know, I look at, God bless Charlie Brandt and Frank Sheeran, and that in one sense, you know, because everybody wants to get their book turned into a Scorsese movie. So I don't hold that against them. Great. But, you know, Frank Sheeran, you know, it's the con from, it's the great con. It's the long con. It's the great con. It's a con from the grave. I mean, he's laughing from the graveyard that his legacy is, and it's never going to get. This is for Joe and Jane America. This is the gospel. Frank Sheeran killed Jimmy Hoffa. Martin Scorsese told us,
and he was so dead nuts accurate in his previous films about this, you know, in the genre.
Yeah, and this is just it's farcical. And if you talk to any FBI agent that worked the Jimmy Hoffa case, you talk to any criminal that was involved in the Jimmy Hoffa investigation, they all laugh when you put the name Frank Sheeran up to them as someone that might have had something to do with this. I mean, there's a growing belief amongst retired FBI agents right now, and I know one or two of them that are actually doing research to this, that they want to somehow present, and I don't know how they'll go about doing this, that not only did Frank Sheeran not kill Jimmy Hoffa, but their premise of this investigation is that Frank Sheeran never killed anybody. And they promote him in the movie as some, you know, trained mafia killer who got his, you know, learned the tricks of the trade in the military and brought him over to, you know, when he was in World War II, and then, you know, started using that skill set for the mafia, and he was some secret weapon for the mafia. And it's like none of that. It's laughable.
Koppelman, is it Brian Koppelman, the creator of Rounders, was on the Bill Simmons rewatchables show talking about The Godfather, and they had a brief mention of The Irishman in that. And Koppelman was criticizing Bill Simmons for not having liked The Irishman. And Koppelman, who, you know, wrote Rounders, is a successful guy in his own right, said that The Irishman is going to age to the level or near of The Godfather. Mm-hmm. That it's liked now, it's going to age incredibly. Do you think Koppelman's insane?
Blasphemy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's just what he said. I haven't even seen it.
How about we just talk about, in that context, Casino? Casino wasn't incredibly well received. Casino has aged miraculously.
That's what he's predicting at.
But what I'm saying is, though, if you go back, and I'm a little older than you guys, I went and saw Casino at the theater. I remember the reaction to Casino. It wasn't anywhere near the reaction to Goodfellas. Casino is something that gained a lot of love as the years went on, in a similar way to Scarface. I mean, look at the Oscar nominations for Goodfellas compared to Casino. There was only one nomination. Sharon Stone.
I mean, Scorsese had such an undying loyalty to the truth, where any changes in the two movies, and we've talked about them, were more cosmetic or subtle, or he changed the location of this was not actually a cornfield, it was a basement, but everything else is the same. He was very loyal to the truth here. Do you think that Martin Scorsese believes the story he told in The Irishman?
I don't think Martin Scorsese cares. I think
he cared in the other two.
I'm just telling you from what I've heard from people that have hit the siren, Benny, from people that have been involved in conversations with the people that made that movie, including Scorsese and De Niro. That Scorsese is just like, I want to tell a great story. I don't care if it's true. Robert De Niro is the person that is adamant that Frank Sheeran is telling the truth and everything that they said in that movie is true, and that Frank Sheeran murdered Jimmy Hoffa. That's all De Niro.
He believes that.
De Niro
like actually believes
yes. And I know people that I respect that are considered the foremost experts in this subject that had meetings with Scorsese and De Niro before the production of the movie, telling them, you're wrong to approach this material like this, and you're going to be spreading lies, and because it's coming from you, everybody's going to believe it. And they didn't care.
We don't know what happened with Hoffa, though. So we seem to know a lot more about the loose ends with Goodfellas and Casino and the.
I know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa.
Well, you don't actually know.
I do know.
Let's go find him then. Where's he at?
I'm saying I can't.
That's our most viral clip that we've ever done.
I can't tell you 100% what happened to him, but me and the FBI can tell you 99.9% what happened to him and who did it.
Why don't they tell us that story then?
I bet they will on the 50-year anniversary. I think they're going to close the investigation and issue a report.
Really?
Yeah.
What are we at? It was 78 that happened?
75. So it'll be another
pretty good random
2 years. But
so you think we're 2 years away from no body, obviously, but
I think they'll shut the investigation down. That's just I don't
shut it down or case closed. We've solved it. That's two different.
Well, they can't solve it. They don't have a body and they don't have anyone to arrest.
That's what I was clarifying.
I'm saying
you're saying close it.
They're going to close the investigation and say, this is what we know. This is 99.9% of certainty of what happened. This is who did it. And that's as far as we can go with this thing. But what I'm saying is that there isn't a mystery. If Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro would have done their due diligence, they would have learned very quickly that what they're saying in that story is a huge falsehood.
Is our knowledge of...
And it's not like something that's like open for debate where you have this one school of thought that believes Sheeran and this one school of thought that doesn't believe Sheeran. Every single expert, every single investigator, every single FBI agent that worked this case dismissed it. It's unequivocal.
And the funny thing is there are 1,000 theories as to what happened and who was involved. There have been so many people implicated. And it looks like they just glommed on a random fringe theory.
Yeah, and furthermore, it's very disrespectful to Detroit. The entire movie makes fun of Detroit. They make Tony Giacalone look like he was a water boy. The Giacalones were beside themselves with that portrayal of Tony Giacalone.
So the Giacalones did not like the portrayal.
They made him look like some type of bench warmer, when in fact he's LeBron James.
Didn't he actually kill him?
No, Billy.
Not literally, but order the killing. The Giacalone.
He quarterbacked it. Billy Giacalone, his brother, and most likely Tony Palazzolo, who was the downriver Detroit mob capo, were the killers.
Do we know as much or more about the events that The Irishman is based on than we did and do about Casino and Goodfellas?
Yeah.
So there's no excuse to botch it like they did.
And it's not a coincidence that they didn't shoot in Detroit. They knew if they came into town that they would get embarrassed.
Oh, do you think that was the reason? Come
Yes, I do. I do.
Really?
Yes.
Why? By who?
By the media here.
There was no pushback locally that I'm aware of.
Because you did a movie about an event that took place in Detroit, and you don't deal with Detroit. The word Detroit is mentioned like 2 times in a 3-hour movie.
Is it a good movie if I have no idea what actually happened?
No.
So it's not even good from that angle. If I had watched it.
I'm biased.
Oh, yeah, you're as jaded against it as possible, but I don't blame you. I'd feel the same way. If someone made a movie that Kenneth Walker wasn't the best player in America in 2021,
if I get further away from it, I might change my opinion. And for example, American Gangster. When I watched American Gangster in the theater, knowing the true story of Frank Lucas and Richie Roberts,
you said it was not as big of a deal.
My stomach turned, and I was like, I can't. It was blasphemy. But the further I get away from it, and I can remove the fictitious narrative and just look at it as a piece of art. I love American Gangster now. I really do. I can, whenever it's on, I can't turn it off.
It's so good. Russell Crowe's fantastic too. Denzel.
But as long as I can remove, going into it, I thought I was going to see the real story of Frank Lucas, and that's not what it is, and that's fine. But at the time, I was very offended, and I didn't like it. But now I can watch it nonstop. Maybe I'll feel the same way about The Irishman in 10 years. I don't know.
So have you had a first-hand conversation with a member of the Giacalone family about The Irishman?
Yeah.
What was their? I mean, I know they didn't like it. They thought it was a bench from.
Everybody in Detroit is offended. Everybody related or involved or connected to the Detroit Mafia is offended by that narrative. It makes Detroit look weak. It makes Detroit look like they were in terms of the Mafia, that they're child of the poor, that they need help handling their own business. When Detroit is the Cadillac of American Mafia. They're the Ivy League. They do it better than anybody. They don't need anyone's help. The fact these guys are like, you think we needed some drunk from Delaware to come into our city and handle our business?
Was the Detroit Mafia as powerful as anyone at their peak?
Yes.
No one would guess that. Everyone would say New York or Chicago, right? Is that bias creeping in?
New York and Chicago needed to do business with Detroit. Like, they couldn't be who they were without Detroit. I mean, Detroit, just in terms of narcotics, they were the pipeline for the entire country's heroin distribution business, starting in the 30s all the way through the 80s.
Isn't the Wright Hoffa movie, the book on that, kind of closed? The window closed, maybe is a better way to put it. Now that Scorsese has done that story,
that's what's so. But
we're kind of done.
That's the travesty of it.
No one's going to follow.
Right, that's the travesty of it. That people are Scorsese did it, so there's no reason to question it or no reason to actually go trying to get the story right.
I'm wrestling. People like you and the experts in the field that are so against it are the reason I haven't seen it. I'm a huge Scorsese fan. I'm fascinated by Hoffa. I think Robert De Niro is the best actor that's ever walked the face of the earth. I have every reason to see this thing. It's based in my hometown.
But none of the movie takes place in Detroit.
But you get what I'm saying. I have every reason in the world to have made this appointment viewing. And you'll
get a kick of where they put the Marcus Red Fox, which we all know is on Telegraph Road.
I sent you a picture of it the other day.
Right.
Yeah.
In the movie, they make it seem like it's in the rolling hills of upstate Pennsylvania.
I actually had a Jimmy Hoffa conversation with Dennis Rodman. He very proudly told me he lived a mile away from where they picked up Hoffa. Yeah. That was before he lived there, obviously. Yeah. But that was one of the only coherent things Dennis Rodman said.
I wish that it would have approached it differently, but it is what it is. Scorsese's still a genius. He's still my all-time favorite director.
You forgive him.
I wish they cared a little bit more.
Yeah.
About the history that they were skewing. I talked to a couple people in the film. Can hit the siren again. Some pretty big characters, some pretty big actors, and they confided in me that they all knew it was bullshit, and that they used to kind of on the set sit around behind De Niro's back and make fun of him. Say that Bob actually thinks this shit actually happened this way.
He bought it, and it's such a. You said his portrayals in the two predecessors of this from the Scorsese library were so dead nuts on.
And Russell Bufalino, the mob boss in this story, played by Joe Pesci. By the way, in terms of performance, one of Joe Pesci's greatest performances. As much as I dislike the movie, Joe Pesci was excellent. But Russell Bufalino in the last, let's say, 20 years, since this story started to gain traction, has gone from the most underrated mob boss in American history to the most overrated mob boss in American history.
I got to watch it, despite your lack of endorsement.
No, I'm not telling you not to watch it.
Pesci alone is...
Pesci's great. Pesci's great in it.
Yeah.
He's great in it.
Scott Bernstein. Anything else before we wrap? Anything you want to plug?
Check the OG podcast. We share a producer. Benny has been a game changer for me in getting my brand up and moving onto YouTube and putting out consistent video content now, not just audio and written. So check that out. And got a new recruiting website that I'm doing, which is my side gig, where I do football and basketball college recruiting. So if you're interested in that, I know some of your audience will be.
Yes.
So you can check out BerniesBlueChips.com. I do football and basketball college recruiting for Metro Detroit. And go check out those two documentaries I did on the true story behind Goodfellas and Casino on Fox Nation streaming.
Wonderful. You're the best, man. Honestly,
Thanks,
I can see why everyone loves you and demands for your return. And my buddy, the Stu Cast, he's awesome. He was so excited.
Stu's the best.
I love that guy. Stu's the man. And I always like Ben is such a critical component, man. And I never really thought about it in these terms until just now. But believe me, I'm not taking credit for this, Ben. It's because you're awesome. But Ben has gotten hired 3 times because of this show, because people see how awesome he is.
Yeah, it's great.
Like you worked with him, Jack Ebling at Michigan State. I don't know if I'm allowed to say his 3rd job with the radio station. I don't know if that's anonymous or not. But he's gotten hired 3 times because people see how awesome he is here. And it gets to a point where if he takes any more, I told my buddy Adam, if he ever does his own thing, now that he's left Woodward Sports, Ben, you got to leave Ben alone. Too many people are hiring this guy. Scott Bernstein, you're the best, man. Love you and love to have you back. I could do 10 of these in a row and still have a lot left to say.
I still say that I'll part with, Goodfellas, the perfect movie. Not saying it's not. But if you really want to see what I think is the most accurate portrayal of a mob guy on film, Donnie Brasco, the Al Pacino character, that, for the most part, that's the Mafia.
Never seen it.
Okay, well, there's a scene in that movie where he's taking a sledgehammer to a parking meter. And that's how he's making his money. That gritty, unglamorous, kind of pathetic picture, that's the Mafia, not the Lufthansa heist.
But they both happen.
Right.
Yeah. I got to check that one out. Plus, Pacino.
Right. That's a true story, too. So.
Yeah. Maybe we'll talk about that one next time after I actually see it. And I'll watch it.
And I don't think Benny wasn't with me at that point, but I had a blow up with Joe Pistone, the real Donnie Brasco, over some stuff.
On tape?
Over a phone call.
Oh, I want to see the stuff that's actually on tape, because I have the tape of you shitting all over that other guy. I'm not going to say his name. I don't want to be causing any inflammatory problems.
We did a podcast on the real story behind Donnie Brasco, and we interviewed somebody that wasn't taken down in the case. And if you listened to the podcast, we say that in the first 20 seconds. So Joe Pistone obviously did not listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
And he leaves me this. He gets my number from someone who gave him. I never gave permission to give my number to. And he leaves me this long message chastising us for telling a story that was false, because the guy that we interviewed had nothing to do with his case. And I'm like, so you obviously didn't listen to the episode. And although he wasn't arrested in your case, he was connected to every single person that was arrested in your case and did murders for those people and was a nephew to those people. So he was more than qualified to discuss it. Most of the people in your case are dead. So I got one of the guys that wasn't, even though he wasn't arrested in your case. And he's lecturing me, and then he doesn't give me an opportunity to call him back. He blocks the number. And then when I called the guy that gave him my number, I was like, tell this motherfucker that I want to respond to him. He just gave me an hour-long lecture about something that is totally false. He never actually consumed the episode. And you're trying to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about?
You get more angry mob people calling you up and threatening you.
This was an FBI agent that went undercover into the mafia.
Related to the mafia in this case, but I don't feel bad, man. You know how many times people don't listen to my stuff and yell at me about it?
I'm like, me and Jimmy are like, it's literally in the first 5 seconds of the episode.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I mean, read my mentions any day of the week. The things that have been attributed to me that I have never said or even like discussed would blow your mind. I don't know like who these people are actually watching. I mean, this is, join the club on that one. Although no one's threatened to kill me. I had a guy threatening to come over to my house. This guy's like tweeting out pictures of my wife around. So he looks kind of cute in the picture. I married her. I'm biased, but like I don't know, I don't know what you're trying to prove with that, but
this was awesome. I love doing this. So I love what you do.
Everybody loves you.
I tell Ben all the time that I wish I could have Spiro every day and giving me all of my Detroit sports talk, not just. Outside of Mike Valenti, there's nobody, and I'm not just saying this because you're my buddy and I'm on your show, but I don't think there's anyone better in this market outside of Mike Valenti than Justin Spiro.
Thanks, man.
So I'm your biggest fan.
I appreciate that, and I have no problem being behind Valenti because I think he's the best to ever do it in this market. So too. I would never even try to get into that pool. He's the man. He's the best, but. Coming from you, that's a high compliment.
Thank you,
you're
sir.
Good taste, smart man yourself, and the most popular guest, arguably, we've ever had on this show. I hope people enjoyed this one.
Very proud.
Way too long to have you back in a solo fashion. I will be having you back solo soon if you're up for it. There's so much I could do with you. Scott Bernstein, you're the best. Ben, great job by you as always. I know it's fun because you got both your coworkers here with you at the same time. Eric is on vacation. This is like the one time he's not watching. But if you are, after the fact, Eric, thanks. Love you. Spiro Avenue show. Graham Couch next week. Graham Couch has said no to me like for 8 years. So this is actually a huge occasion the night before Michigan State kicks off against Central. I can't believe this guy agreed to drive down here for this. Alas, he will be here. Graham Couch next Thursday.
Shout out to my boy, Tricky Trey Mosley. He's going to be all Big Ten this year.
I love Trey Mosley. I'll talk to you about Trey Mosley right now. I love that guy, and he's a great understated leader for this program.
Great kid, too.
They just did a feature on him, too. It was one of the best ones they've done on the Spartans All Access. Fantastic. Spiro Avenue Show. We'll see you next week. Thanks, guys. Bye.